I've heard you on a number of your shows, and also the recent show that you just started with. Remind me his name?
Daryl Cooper.
Yeah.
Martyr Made.
That's incredible.
Yeah, isn't it great?
It's such an awesome show that you guys are doing together.
Yeah.
And one of you mentioned on the most recent episode flooding the zone with information rather than just putting out inherently false information in a single narrative from, a state-run media organization.
Right.
It's just bombarding us with so much information, with so many conflicting narratives coming from so many different angles that people become so overwhelmed. Couple that with a variety of health-related issues that people have via a variety of mechanisms, and they're so cut off from their intuition, and then people are outsourcing to AI, thinking that AI in some cases can be hackable or jailbroken and is going to give them objective information, which I hesitate to buy into, and I'm incredibly skeptical of. So with all that, let's begin. First off, I want you to introduce yourself for those who may not be familiar with you. Definitely have a lot of libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist people who listen to this show. So given that, they've likely heard of you, but if not, I'd like you to introduce yourself. And then from there, let's get into some brief historical context regarding Israel-Palestine. And then I just want to dive right into a variety of the things that are occurring with that situation.
Sure. Well, I'm basically just a Ron Paul libertarian. I'm from Austin, and I've been pretty much an anti-government libertarian type my whole life. I've never been left or right. So, but I just come from that kind of post-Waco anti-government tradition, but I just never got over it. And then, but I've been mostly specializing in foreign policy stuff in this century, palling around with the guys from antiwar.com, where I'm now editorial director. And then in 2016, I founded the Libertarian Institute with William Norman Grigg and Sheldon Richman. And unfortunately, Will passed soon after that, but we've kept the thing going and got a pretty good deal going there. And then I'm the host of the Scott Horton Show, which I've been doing. That's really my main job, supposedly, is I've been doing this interview show since 2003. And I've done 6,100 and something, I guess, episodes of that. And I've written a few books. Fool's Errand about Afghanistan, enough already about the war on terrorism, and Provoked about the Cold War with Russia and the war in Ukraine, which came out last November. And then I think that's all my jobs. And I guess I'll go ahead and tell you that very soon we'll be debuting. It's already been announced. So I'll tell you, it's the Scott Horton Academy for Foreign Policy and Freedom. And it's based on the Tom Woods Liberty Classroom. And he's the one who built it for me. But it's me doing courses on the Middle East and on the Cold War with Russia. And then as well as a bunch of other great experts, including the great libertarian journalist James Bovard, writer for the New York Post and fellow at the Institute, as well as Ramzi Baroud, the Palestinian exile, I guess I should say, a refugee and brilliant writer, as well as William Bupert, the Army Special Forces expert and counterinsurgency debunker. And he's doing a course on how America lost every war since 1945. And then C.J. Kilmer is doing one for us about how Woodrow Wilson is the worst person who ever lived, because he's, of course, the father of Hitler and Stalin. And so, and World War II and the rest. So, and so it's going to be great. And also Tom Woods has a guy, which I can't get too far into this because my knowledge is somewhat limited. I know the political side of it, but Tom Woods has found a theologian of some merit, I guess, who is going to explain the origins of Darbyite dispensationalist Christianity in the 19th century and the ideology of serving and recreating Israel to force Jesus to come back, or to coincidentally line up with God's plan timeline, or however exactly that works and all that. So he's going to be talking about that, because Tom, of course, is Catholic, so he has a different tradition that understands those things in a different way, which I'm not even sure who he's picked yet. I need to talk with him about that, but I know a little bit about that sort of premillennialist dispensationalism and all that from especially W. Bush years. But anyway.
Yeah, there's a variety.
So that's going to be the Scott Horton Academy. That's at scotthortonacademy.com.
Cool.
And if you just put your email address in there, then you'll be the first to know. And there's a cool little video to promote the thing if you want to watch it, the great Dan Smots. But that's all I got to say about that. That's who I am.
Epic.
There.
Yeah. a man of many talents and a knowledge on a variety of geopolitical.
No, never mind that. You were going to say something else. I interrupted your train of thought there.
No, you're good. You're good. Let's just get right into the historical context on Israel and Palestine. And if you're listening to this or watching this and you're feeling inclined to skip ahead, I recommend not skipping ahead. I highly suggest not skipping ahead. I consider you to be one of the most knowledgeable, most unbiased, dare I say, people to provide commentary on what is occurring between Israel and Palestine. Now, unbiased does not mean that you do not call out what is overtly or obviously wrong, more immoral, illogical, to be clear. It's not that you're not taking a stance. It's that you're unbiased from the sense that you stick to values and principles rather than towing political ideologies or things like this.
Yeah, or protecting any faction involved in the thing. Right.
Exactly.
And that's my bias. I'll admit to the bias. The bias is against any organized armed group of men proclaiming their right to rule anybody. So whoever is trying to be in charge, I tend to see all them in black hats, and the innocent civilians are the white hats in the story, virtually always. So it's black and white, but just in a different way than other people see it, maybe.
Likewise. Okay. So with that, if you wouldn't mind just giving a brief overview of the historical context. I know that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
That has led us to this point. Just whatever's top of mind for you to bring up relative to that.
Well, you know what? I'll go ahead, and the one thing I left off in my bio, I'm going to have to remember to add this now, is I'm co-host of a brand new podcast with the great historian Daryl Cooper called Provoked, named after my most recent book on Russia, but that he was going to be my co-author, but that never happened. But anyway, he did this fantastic 25-hour-long podcast series called Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, where he tells the story of the founding of Israel. The whole thing is 25 hours leading up to the founding. Right?
That's insane.
So it's so good. Yeah. I mean, it's just fantastic. Talk about unbiased and fair to all sides and all that. It's so good. In fact, he doesn't just describe everything. He demands that you empathize with all sides as he goes through the thing and see it through everybody's different eyes. It's really great stuff. So if people want to like really deep dive on all that, that's the deal. But there was, it was the age of nationalism in Europe, and there was no Jewistan in Eastern Europe, right? They were a minority kind of everywhere without a nation state. And so there was a movement of Jewish nationalism, and the idea was to go somewhere, maybe Madagascar or maybe Argentina or whatever. And then they settled on Palestine because obviously, the historical connotations and all that made sense. And of course it was closer, and, they thought that they could convince more people to do that. And they had limited success. I mean, they did have some success, but limited success until after World War II. And then the idea was, well, the European powers and the United States are going to more or less help facilitate the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine, as there's so many refugees who just want to get the hell out of Europe after what just happened in the Holocaust there. And so that was the justification for it. And quite frankly, and I don't want to sound too woke about it. I know everybody lives and are victims of our time and whatever. But if you imagine being a victim of that time for a minute, the idea was that these are just a bunch of towel heads and camel jockeys and sand N-words anyway. And really, who cares about them? They're just the Arabs. And so maybe people didn't love the Jews that much or something like that, but it was whatever, they're whiter, they're European, and these natives kind of got to be pushed out. And the idea was it's basically an afterthought. And there's a lot of propaganda that just said, well, this was a land without people, for a people without land. So what a coincidence that the eastern shore of the Mediterranean had never been settled, or not in 2,000 years, I guess. And so now it's just the heroic return of a bunch of Eastern European refugees who want to come and live there. And it really was a conspiracy theory for a long time that there were 750,000 Palestinians who'd been cleansed from their land. It was just the Arab countries attacked and tried to kill them, and so they defended themselves and all this. And, I know a reporter named Eric Margulies. He's a great war reporter, and so was his mother. She was a enterprising Lois Lane type figure running around there by herself right after World War II. And she reported on the plight of the Palestinians living in the refugee camps in Gaza and the West Bank then. And they threatened to kill her. Like it was a huge cover up that this had happened. And so they threatened to kill her, and they threatened to kill baby Eric. That if she would tell this story, like it was a big deal to enforce this thing. You heard me. I said a land without people. That's the narrative. And we're sticking to it because we don't want to have to answer for this. Now, also during the war. Oh, and I should really mention here, my colleague Sheldon Richmond at the Libertarian Institute, co-founder of the Institute with me. We published a book by him, which is a collection of essays over many years, but it's such a great primer on this. It's called Coming to Palestine. And as you may or may not infer from his name, he's raised Jewish and Zionist in this country, from Philadelphia. And he just learned too much about the origins of this thing and how ugly it was. And so dropped that. But he tells the story in there, very importantly, of how during the 48 war, Israel made a secret deal with the king of Jordan to let him keep the West Bank. That way that the Palestinians could not have their state. It would not and could not be created while they were also creating their Jewish state, because the idea was we want that land someday. So we can put it under the control of Jordan now. We can take it from him later. It'll be a lot easier than conquering a new created Palestinian state with its own supposed sovereignty. Where here, the king of Jordan is sort of beyond his jurisdiction over the river anyway, right? So, which is what eventually came to pass in 1960. Well, let me go back. We'll get to 67 in a sec. But so what you have to understand about the Nakba, as they call it, the foundation of and the cleansing of the Palestinians in order to make way for the new Israeli state, is that it worked. Okay, so by removing 750,000 people, that's the population of the greater Austin metropolitan area, for example, maybe right up to Georgetown, maybe not quite this far north, but everybody from here to San Marcos, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's a lot of people, okay? So by removing them from the territory of what you would call like 1967 borders, that is excluding the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, that they created an 80-20 super duper majority Jewish state. So there's some Palestinians, Christians and Muslims, but they're second or third class citizens basically, but they didn't have it as bad as the occupied later would after Israel took control of the West Bank and Gaza Strip later. But they were only a fifth of the population or less, right? No, they're what, a seventh or whatever, eighth. I'm not good.
A low minority, essentially.
Yeah. So they could live there and it could still be a Jewish democracy. And the fight over power in the parliament, the Knesset, is always going to be between Jews. And in fact, is only in very recent years, when Netanyahu was out of power for just a minute there in 2000 and I'm almost certain 21, was the first time that they had ever formed a government with an Arab party as part of the coalition. And it fell apart pretty quickly. But the tradition had always been that any coalition of Jewish parties in the Knesset would rather lose and let the other side win if they would have to ally with the Arab party to get the seat. And that had always been the tradition, unbroken up until like 3 years ago or whatever. So just goes to show how little power they ever had in there. But the point being, not to justify what they're doing or whatever, but I'm just saying what they had accomplished was essentially sustainable, probably, right? And then the idea was, at that time, Gaza was under the control of Egypt and the West Bank was under the control of Jordan. But then after the 67 war, Israel took control of both of those territories, as well as the Sinai Peninsula, but it was less important, smaller population there, transferred back to Egypt before very long. But in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the thing was, once they took control of that territory, they couldn't imagine giving it back up again. And especially the West Bank for biblical reasons. And there are people who they just say, of course, all the way to Egypt and whatever. And so the Gaza Strip too, why not? But the real heart of the project is that the West Bank ain't the West Bank of the Jordan River, Palestinian territory. It's Judea and Samaria. And so God says from 3,000 years ago that these settlers can take it now. And so, in other words, they've already taken 88%, or was it, I'm sorry, it was 78% of historic Palestine. And so now they're going to take the last 22% too, because they want all of it. The problem, of course, being is that unlike in the Nakba, where they had cleansed 700,000 people off of their property, here they're not going to be able to get away with doing that again. And they couldn't. They did cleanse another couple 100,000 out of Israel proper into the West Bank. And they took even more of the West Bank, actually. So where they cleansed them from was territory where they expanded their control. But they couldn't just push them all into Jordan across the river. They couldn't just push them all into Syria or something for, I guess, just maybe American political reasons wouldn't let them do it or whatever exactly the holdup was. So in essence, they stole all that land, but then they kidnapped all those people. They were unable to cleanse them all. So this is the real source of the controversy, like quite frankly. And people say, well, the Palestinians would never give up reclaiming all of historic Palestine. I think that's probably true for a lot of them, but then again, they wouldn't necessarily have the power to do that, so it wouldn't really be an issue other than a propaganda slogan of the Zionists anyway. You know what I mean?
Yep.
If they did have independence on the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And so, but even when they, right after the 67 war, as Daryl Cooper points out, that David Ben-Gurion, who had been the founding prime minister of Israel, he said, we should not keep these territories because they come with all these people that we don't want. And so what are we going to do? We're going to have them under military occupation from now on? We're going to figure out what to do about them later someday? And then there are many, critics inside Israel too that said, well, what is this going to do to us now? We're a whole nation of jailers holding an almost equal number of people as us in this captivity this way. Mm-hmm. How is this supposed to work over the long term? But the right's answer to that was, we'll figure it out someday. Don't worry about it. The answer now is, we just want to keep taking this territory. Mm-hmm. So now, and I'll try to steelman my argument as best I can for, especially in more recent times where people have all these objections. It's worth mentioning that Israel started the 1967 war, and they later admitted that they were just pretending to believe that Egypt was about to attack them. They knew that they weren't. They were just taking advantage of the situation. And it was during that war where they attacked the USS Liberty and almost sank it and killed 34 sailors and National Security Agency officers and wounded many more. Very good men, including some that I know and have talked to. I hope that you'll talk to Phil Turney and some of these guys. I can help put you in contact if your audience is interested. And that was, I believe, people have more expansive interpretations of this. I think the most likely interpretation is the one by James Bamford in Body of Secrets, which is that the Israelis were massacring Egyptian soldiers on the Sinai Peninsula and were covering it up. Some say that it was a false flag to try to get America to jump into the war on Israel's side against Egypt, but I'm less convinced by the evidence in those arguments. But anyway, point being that the Israelis are absolutely merciless, and they absolutely knew. In fact, if people want to look this up, if you put in my name, I think this is, I can't remember if this is a blog entry or a tweet. It might be both. But if you put in my name and USS Liberty, argument from authority, because I'm joshing around that obviously that's a logical fallacy, right?
Right.
Except I have a list of names this long from the State Department, the CIA, the Defense Department, the National Security Agency, and all the admirals and all the generals, and including Richard Helms and Stansfield Turner and all of these guys, everybody in the state, they knew it was deliberate. Forget it. Mm-hmm. And so and many of them have arguments too. You should listen to them. You know what I mean? It is absolutely clear what happened there. So worth mentioning that this is our greatest ally in the world and all of that. It's been a while since the English sank one of our ships, or tried to,
Right.
But anyway, they did attack the French fleet, but anyway, I go on tangents sometimes.
I love it.
No, so the point being that David Ben-Gurion said that from Israel's point of view, this is suicidal. How are we going to keep control of all these people and do this? And then, of course, he was right. So that's the whole thing. Throughout the 70s, and there's this lady. Oh, man, I'm sorry. Her name is escaping me. I can see her face. She's the Weiss, Daniela Weiss. She's one of the leaders of the expansionist and settler movement on the West Bank, and is very much in favor of expanding in the Gaza Strip. And there's a clip of her, and I forget, I can't name my footnote. I apologize for somebody's research here that I'm poaching, that where they found the clip of her explaining that since the early 70s, she was working with Ariel Sharon to strategically put settlements here, and here in order to divide the West Bank in a way that it could never be independent again, and that the idea of a Palestinian state would be completely off the table from the very get-go. That was their immediate agenda, was to do that. So by the time of 1979 and Camp David, when Jimmy Carter and Zbigniew Brzezinski basically twisted their arm to make peace with Egypt and promise to begin work on creating a Palestinian state, and this is when Yasser Arafat then recognized Israel within, or indicated that he would. He actually officially did in 1988, but he indicated that he would. And this is why they invaded Lebanon, actually, was to attack him, because he said that he would make peace with them. And they said, no, we got to have no partner for peace. You're familiar with that cliche. We have no partner for peace. We just shot him in the head or gave him some polonium poisoning or this kind of thing. So, so that's a thing of theirs. They did that same thing to the leader of Hamas when he finally threw in the towel in January 2004. He goes, I'm over this. Enough of this already. We're going to get back on track in a second, but on this theme, it's very important.
It's important. Very important.
The head of Hamas is this old man in a wheelchair, Sheikh Yassin, who Israel had helped him build Hamas up as a right-wing religious counter. We'll get back to that in a moment. But anyway, this is the great betrayal. He finally says, enough. I'm willing to recognize Israel. Let's go ahead and essentially just surrender the last of our resistance and figure this out. And then 2 months later, they killed him in a missile strike. And importantly, that missile strike is what led to the riot in Fallujah and the lynching of the Blackwater guards, whose bodies were burned and their corpses were hoisted from the bridge, which led to George Bush ordering General James Mattis to send the Marine Corps in there to do the first big battle of Fallujah in March of 2004, which led then to also the first Shiite uprising of Muqtada al-Sadr and his men in East Baghdad. And it was a huge, kick
cascade
in the insurgency, for a boost for the insurgency, the Sunni-based insurgency in, Samarra and Mosul and Fallujah and all the rest of the Western rebelling provinces, as well as one of the most important leaders of the Shiite faction that we were putting in power, Muqtada al-Sadr, and things were never the same with him ever again after that anyway. And so it was really the price Americans got to pay and American soldiers paid for Israel killing their own, heel, basically, right? Their own jabroni that they had helped to, build up in power to divide and conquer the Palestinians in the first place. As soon as he's willing to completely surrender to them, they blast him. Anyway,
I love hearing stuff like this, just real quick, and then I want you to continue, just to add quick little 2 cents here. Because this lends credence to the idea that much of the conflicts, I'm no longer saying we when I say this. Yes, I'm a former service member, former Army captain, and it's so funny, just another quick aside, the tendency of people who are living on the land and known as the United States of America to say we when referring to what the U.S. government does.
Yeah. So, it's a very commie language English, isn't it?
It really, it's really wild. But the deeper implications of that, of self-identifying with the state to varying degrees and what the state does. But the point is that it lends credence to the idea that much of or pieces of the U.S. government's involvement in the Middle East through Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and before that, and even after that, are the result of our relationship to some degree with the Israeli state. Because a lot of people will refer to things that are easy, sort of truther conspiracy theorist tropes that may have some validity, but point to the dancing Israelis on 9/11. And then that's what they point to reference. That's how we got involved in Iraq and Afghanistan. But stories like this, the trickle down effect, no, this has real world implications based on policies and things that Israel quite literally is doing related to their geopolitical strategy, if they even have one.
Right.
Seems that they do have one, a lot of long-term goals, let's say, that are sort of parsing out right now. But you get the point. It's this lends credence to, no, this is factually what occurs and how the U.S. government is then impacted and continually involved in sending sons and daughters who are signing up for what they think are noble causes to the meat grinder under false pretenses, essentially.
Yep, that's right. And that's the story we're telling. As I said, I'm a Ron Paul guy, and he absolutely got this right in 2007 when he whooped Rudy Giuliani. He says, blowback, man. They hate us because we're bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi. They said so over and over again. That was what it was about. So hold that thought, though, because we're about to catch up to there. So in 1979, when they go to Camp David, they make peace with Egypt, as long as America pays Egypt billions of dollars a year to make nice with Israel. And they promised to begin work on a Palestinian state. And as I say, that's why they then quickly, in the Reagan years, turn around and attack, or at the end of the Carter years even, or no, I guess it was early Reagan, went ahead and invaded Lebanon to try to get Arafat so that they wouldn't have anybody to make peace with there. But then that didn't work. He got out of there, and I forgot if that was when he went to Tunisia or what, but whatever. By the time, H.W. Bush wanted to push forward, and this was at the advice of James Baker. And this is, very important because people think, oh, this is just liberals versus conservatives, and the conservatives all just want to do whatever Israel wants. But here's Ronald Reagan's Treasury Secretary is now his successor, H.W. Bush's Secretary of State. And after Iraq War I, when Bush's approval rating, Bush Sr. this is, when his approval rating was at 90-something% in 1991, we're talking about, then James Baker said to H.W. Bush, now's the time for us to push for a Palestinian state. We've got to put this issue to bed. We got to get these settlers out of there while we can, or do whatever crucial land swaps we got to do before it's too late. And they held up a loan guarantee to the Israelis that was crucial for them. And it was a big deal. And Bush complained that, geez, there's 10,000 lobbyists up on Capitol Hill up against little old me and all this. And then I think importantly, Baker, and I'm sure he was joking. If you know about James Baker and like his character, if you've ever seen him on TV very much or whatever, well, he's a good old Texas boy. I'm sure he meant this in jest. It doesn't look very funny in print, depending on who's reading it. But the quote was, F the Jews, they don't vote for us anyway. And then, so, yeah, but you know what? They write checks or don't. And so it's a big deal and you're going to lose Florida. And like, this is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And then Bill Clinton smelled blood there and attacked Bush for selling out the Israelis and all that. So they put, that was what rocked the vote and all that was about. Mm-hmm. And I swear I was so interested in that election in 1992. I never heard anybody say the word Israel once, that Israel has a favored candidate in this election and that is meaningful in any way. Like, what do you mean? Isn't that a foreign country?
What does that matter?
Yeah.
What does that matter?
But later Bush himself blamed them and said that their intervention, they put their thumb on the scale, or pro-Zionist forces in America put their thumb on the scale against them to help get Bill Clinton elected in the first place. So there's, that's what you get for, putting Israel first, is you get Bill Clinton. Yeah. Right. Turns around and ignores the First World Trade Center attack because he's too busy murdering the Branch Davidians, right? His first 6 weeks in power, his first 10 weeks in power. So, anyways, now Clinton does try to get the Israelis to agree to a two-state solution. This is the Oslo Accord in 1993, and it was the idea of Yitzhak Rabin. And it's important here, I guess, to mention that the Israelis, after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, they got along with the Ayatollah. They didn't care, and they basically kept their security services intact and kept their relationship with the Israelis. So while America was backing Saddam Hussein against Iran in the Iran-Iraq War, the Israelis were backing the Iranians. And a lot of times, with a wink and a nod from the Americans, that you guys increase some missiles to them and I'll increase some missiles to them. It's a pretty ugly thing that went on for about 9 years. And it was Jimmy Carter who told Saddam Hussein to go ahead and launch the war in the first place and promise support in the first place. So now, at the end of Iraq War I, after America has bombed the crap out of Iraq for going to Kuwait, which I'm just going to skip that story. It's in the book.
His book's in the show notes. So
now America is occupying Saudi Arabia in all their new bases they built in Saudi for the war. And the Israelis are complaining that because America beat up Iraq so bad in the war, now Iraq isn't powerful enough to balance against Iran. So now they demand America stays to balance against them both. So where Bill Clinton really could have made a deal with Saddam Hussein and with the Ayatollah and done some offshore balancing with his little aircraft carrier with Tom Cruise in the Gulf and whatever would have been fine. And instead, they kept their giant permanent military bases there. And a big part of this was based on, and in fact, there may be people watching this saying, yeah, but what about Saddam Hussein tried to kill Bush Sr.? And that was why Bill Clinton did that. Yeah, but that's not true, of course. It was the Kuwaitis, not the Israelis. It was the Kuwaitis who made up that hoax. It was a whiskey smuggling ring that they just built into this. See, you believed it too, because you never heard anybody say it ain't true. Everybody thinks it's true, but it ain't.
Wow.
And guess what? The girl who said, oh, and I saw the Iraqi soldiers throw the babies on the floor and steal the incubators and leave the babies on the floor to die. It was her father who obviously put her up to that. And then 2 years later, in the spring of 93, was the guy who made up the hoax about the truck bomb plot against Bush Sr. So there was all this pressure on Bill Clinton from the Israelis to do this. And he was like, no, 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 no. And then the Kuwaitis came up with this plot and he went, okay, fine. And adopted the dual containment policy. And then I'm skipping some steps because this is the Israeli-centric version of the story that I'm telling here. But at the same time, as your audience, I'm sure, is well aware, America had been backing the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and not just the locals, but including the Arab Afghan army of proto-Bin Ladenites that we've been sending over to that country to help fight against the commies. Then after the Soviet Union fell, and this is, 91 is the last year of the Soviet Union. That's the year that at the start of that year, we launched Iraq War I. By the end of the year, the Soviet Union's dead and gone. So these guys, and in fact, by the end of 89, the Soviets had withdrawn from Afghanistan. So they had fought a limited civil war, which I believe they lost. Yeah, which they lost in Turkmenistan, in Tajikistan. But I know almost nothing about that. But I know that there was a little bit of that. And then they moved into Bosnia. From 92, they're fighting in Bosnia, and then later in Kosovo and in Chechnya with American and British and Saudi support. That whole time, even while they had already turned on us and they were attacking us. And the first, again, this is sort of proto al-Qaeda, because what we call al-Qaeda really was Egyptian Islamic Jihad and what was called the Azam group, which was the Saudi-run group that Osama bin Laden ended up taking over after Azam was killed in, I forgot what year, I'm going to say 89 or 90 or whatever. So it's where bin Laden's group and Zawahiri's group come together. That's what we call al-Qaeda, basically. So Egyptian Islamic Jihad assassinated a radical right-wing rabbi in New York City, Rabbi Kahane. You may have heard of him. He was the founder of the Koch Party, which the Israeli Supreme Court banned for being fascist and kicked out of the country because he avowedly said every Arab has to go. We either got to kill him or at least force him out at bayonet point till they're all gone. And we never have to deal with this again. That was it. And at that time, that seemed so crazy over the line that they had banned him.
Do you think it was more of a PR thing, or was it legitimately over the line?
No, yeah. At that time, it was the Labor Party ran the Supreme Court and thought that, like, no way, we're liberals and this is crazy, you know? And there's a clip of Kahane explaining to Mike Wallace. People can find this on YouTube. And he says, a lot of American Jews believe in like this Thomas Jefferson stuff, but I don't. In other words, life, liberty for everyone. Right. No. It's us versus them, and I'm on the side of us, and the other side must lose. Simple as that. And so Mike Wallace like, God, geez, whatever. Anyway, so that was their first target. They murdered him in 1990 at an event. They assassinated him. The same group then did the first World Trade Center bombing. And it's important to note that because the CIA was like, we like these guys, they let them into the country. They intervened with the State Department and INS to let the guys in. And then they did nothing to protect us from them. I don't know if they even told the FBI, hey, you guys better watch these guys that we just put in Brooklyn, but there they are. And then it's also true that the FBI could have stopped the attack because they had a walk-in informant who was a guy named Ahmad Salem. And he had been an Egyptian army intelligence officer. And he had been recruited into this plot and volunteered to cook the bomb. So I'll cook the bomb. Then he went to the FBI and said, holy crap, I just got recruited by a real ass terrorist group to cook a bomb. And so the plan is let's use fake explosives and we'll have a great sting and it'll be great. And the agents were named Antisev and Floyd, and they were doing their job, but their boss, Carson Dunbar, wouldn't let them finish the job. And he cut the guy's pay from $500 to $300, tried to insist that he wear a wire at the mosque, which he couldn't do. He's like sleeping on the floor of the mosque in his pajamas. Where's he going to wear a wire? You know what I mean? And so the guy left the case and said, I think the FBI's on to me, and left. Then they brought in Ramzi Youssef, and he's the one who cooked the bomb that almost succeeded in toppling one tower over into the other. And the engineer said if they just parked by the wall instead of by this pillar, it would have happened. Wow. Because of the way that it would have brought in the river, and it would have caused the one tower to fall in the other. I mean, you're talking 20, 30,000 dead. This is when Bill Clinton's been in power a month and a week on the end of February of 93. And everybody was so distracted because 2 days later, the ATF raided the Branch Davidians. And so it was all eyes on Waco. And who wants to learn a bunch of weird Arab names and everything? And it was only 6 people that died. People weren't thinking, boy, it could have been way worse. They were just thinking it was only 6 people. And New York seemed so far from here, further back then, you know? I hate to say that, but it really is.
Right.
It was kind of like, well, that was them, but it's not the same.
Especially
as
before the
Texan.
world was so interconnected like it is now.
Yeah.
Like,
and it was,
yeah, it makes sense.
yeah, just in the mind's eye, it's a little bit further away. Not too much, but a little bit further away, you know?
Yeah.
And so it didn't really capture the attention of that many people, like Bill Curtis on investigative reports and a bunch of kooks like me who thought, oh, the FBI did it on purpose because of the New World Order, whatever, you know, but like, so people who had like a real interest in it paid attention. Nobody else did at all. And so it kind of skated. And then they attacked us all through the 90s. And I skipped one. They hit a hotel in Aden in 1992 and they killed Americans training the Saudi National Guard in 1995. They did the Khobar Towers attack in 1996, which Bill Clinton and everybody blamed, and the FBI blamed on Iran, said that it was Iranian-backed Shiite Hezbollah, Saudi Hezbollah that did it, which is nonsense when it was Osama bin Laden and his guys of fully their men, their MO, and bin Laden took credit for it and you know, explained to Abdel Bari Atwan why he did it and everything and who was the target. It was 19 American airmen who were stationed there to bomb Iraq, right? Patrol the no-fly zones and bomb other radar stations regularly. For 2 or 3 years in a row, the New York Times said it was every other day on average that Bill Clinton bombed Iraq for 8 years. You know,
hold that train of thought real quick.
Sure.
What about the narrative that Osama bin Laden was somehow a CIA asset? Do you think there's any legitimacy to that?
Well, he's certainly a Saudi asset.
Okay.
Right. The thing is, I don't believe that the whole thing was an inside job, and partially because I was a kook before it happened, and I said that the whole thing is just a CIA plot, and here it comes, and whatever. And then, but when it happened,
what were you referring to?
September 11th.
Okay, September 11th.
I just learned so much more about the group themselves, and of course, there's so much double dealing going on there. But also, I think the truthers got carried away on a lot of like conclusion assuming sort of arguments that did not stand the test of time here, where if you actually look very closely at what are the obvious signs of like real suspicions about, never mind so much direct control over bin Laden himself, but even just like the hijackers in the country and what happened there. It's the Purloined Letter. You know that story, the Sherlock Holmes, where they're looking for the Purloined Letter and they can't find it, they can't find it, they can't find it. It's laying right there on the counter. And it's all kind of crumpled up with a bunch of other mail. And so they don't realize that there's the stolen letter right there with all the whatever it was in it. So the Purloined Letter here is the deleted 28 pages, the censored 28 pages of the original congressional report that they eventually did release due to the great work of my friend Brian McGlinchey and others and the families of the 9/11 victims who worked so hard. It was political pressure that forced them to release it. And it shows, and there's so much more because the lawyers from the lawsuits against the Saudis have leaked more and more stuff that's come out to show that the Saudi embassy and other Saudi officials and obvious intelligence agents like al-Bayoumi and San Diego and all that they were really helping these guys to an incredible degree, perhaps you could say running them, and obviously raising huge questions about how much they knew about their plot and what all they were trying to do with them, including if they were trying to infiltrate the group and have a double agent in there and not realizing that these people are committed and they're just going to play you and not get anywhere. I think there's the same argument about the CIA's Alec station, which was run by a bunch of analysts, not spies, and how they had maybe attempted to try to recruit these guys, especially the San Diego cell, was the Flight 77 hijackers, and that essentially didn't work, and that you could sort of imagine them walking away whistling with their hands in their pockets like, oops, and then, but not making sure that the National Police, the FBI, wrapped the guys up. And then people are probably familiar with the story where the FBI, there are named agents, Doug Rossini is one of them, I forget the others' names, but they say they were at the Joint Counterterrorism Center, and they swear the CIA refused, absolutely forbid them from sharing this information with the FBI. And then the CIA says, bullshit, you guys just don't check your email and, you know, whatever, this kind of thing. So, which there is an argument to that the FBI agents, that email is like a bunch of nerd stuff and they get off at 5 and go drinking and they're just not interested in these kinds of topics that much like they should be. And they don't see the heightened emergency. But there's also a great book by James Bamford about the NSA's role in this, and how they were just as bad as information hoarders as the CIA and the FBI. And I should say this too, like, and I know this sounds like a limited hangout to the truthers, but like, whatever. I would actually, well, I'll get to that in a second, but Michael Scheuer, he's on video, the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, and he's testifying before Congress. And the guy asked him about John O'Neill, who was the head of the head of FBI counterterrorism in New York. And so the chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit is talking about the head of the FBI's counterterrorism unit. And he's saying the only good thing that happened to America on 11 September is that building fell on John O'Neill's head. Because that was how bad he wanted to kill that guy.
Wow.
Because they were in that heavy a competition for the data. Once the FBI gets it, they lock it behind a grand jury. Where the CIA, yes, sometimes they work with the Saudis and the Brits to run these guys. But sometimes they wrap them up. Like if you think about the rendition program, or, George Bush would have people kidnapped and tortured, that started under Bill Clinton. That wasn't a George W. Bush invention. So even while Bill Clinton was backing these guys and also provoking them with his continued occupation of Saudi and support for Israel, he's still wrapping up some of them sometimes and sending them home to be taken out and shot mostly. Mm-hmm. There's the famous quote from Robert Baer, who I don't really like. This guy's a former CIA guy and he says a lot of things, but this one seemed right, the way he talked about it.
Take the quote as it is rather
Clinton
than the
years. Yeah, he says, like if you could just say it like this, this probably isn't a lie. He goes, if you want him interrogated, you send him to Jordan. If you want him tortured, you send him to Syria. If you want him to disappear forever, you send him to Egypt. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about the Bill Clinton years. Mm-hmm. He wasn't even talking about W. Bush's war on terror, right? But at the same time, and I show this especially in my most recent book, that Bill Clinton absolutely was supporting their same side and acquiescing to Saudi support and even encouraging Saudi support. That's the cutout, right? Mm-hmm. For their efforts in Bosnia, Kosovo, and in Chechnya. And in fact, as I show in the book, 10 of the 9/11 hijackers, 10 of the 19 had fought on America's side, supposedly, or America had fought on their side in Bosnia and in Chechnya.
Wow.
And so now there are some who say, see, like that's it. Well, maybe it is. But if that's it, then forget all the other noise, dude.
Like you're talking about the speculative narratives.
If you just want to boil it down, you still have to make some assumptions. You do.
Right.
But if you're going to make some assumptions and reasonable ones, it's that Prince Bandar bin Sultan and Prince Turki Al Faisal, the Saudi ambassador and the Saudi head of intelligence, that they did this to us. And then, of course, that raises the question of why they would. Mm-hmm. If they did it deliberately, I mean, these are not bin Ladenites. These might as well be Americans. So then you get to the question whether Dick Cheney told them to, or somebody promised them, we won't nuke Riyadh. We're going to go to Baghdad.
Right.
Trust us. Or what, right? Like,
which isn't too implausible, right?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, quite frankly, like, whatever. It's, I just explained how it's within the realm of possibility, right? But like, do I really think that Dick Cheney has the balls to commit the greatest act of treason, frankly, in all of world history? No, I don't think that. That Donald Rumsfeld is in on a plan to hit the Pentagon with a jumbo jet while he's sitting in the sun of the thing. And no, it wasn't a missile. It was Flight 77. That's the key. Again, all these, whatever. I don't want to get too far into that, but that was the key, was that Saudi intelligence was running the Flight 77 guys. That was what was overlooked for so long, that was especially, one of the most direct links back to the thing. And so, but I think really, dude, it's simpler than that because, for example, Colleen Rowley, you might have heard of her. She was Time Magazine Person of the Year in 2002 because she blew the whistle on how they could have stopped September 11th because they had Zacharias Moussaoui, who they said then was the 20th hijacker, which is not really right. I think it was a guy named Abu Qahtani was supposed to be the 20th hijacker. But anyway, he was probably here for a later mission. But he was the one who famously wanted to learn how to fly a jumbo jet, but he wasn't so concerned about how to take off or land it. And they also thought it was funny that he sort of seemed more of like a scumbag type, but he had a huge wad of cash the way a princeling might. But this guy doesn't seem much like a princeling, this kind of thing, right? So they call the FBI on him. And the FBI, one of the extremely astute cops at that place, said, this guy wants to learn how to fly from Heathrow to New York, JFK. I think he might want to hit the World Trade Center. Oh my God. Insight, man, a cop being smart. Who would have thought? An FBI agent, especially, you'd think he'd be too busy burning a church full of children, but no. So then Colleen Rowley, the lawyer for the office, contacts Washington and says, okay, we need a FISA warrant so we can ask the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to give us permission to search this guy's stuff. Now, they don't suspect of him of any crime. The Fourth Amendment protects you and me and even him. He's suspected of a crime that you have to have a probable cause to believe that a search will lead to evidence of a crime. But here, that's not the case. Here is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And the threshold of evidence here is a reasonable belief. And a reasonable belief what? Of a crime? Nope, not even that. A reasonable belief that this guy's either an agent of a foreign power or of a foreign terrorist group. Now we can go fishing on him. Now we can look up everything that he does and says. Because he's an agent of a foreign power and he's not protected by our Bill of Rights. He's now under this separate jurisdiction. Right? So they have that. They go straight to the Europeans and say, anybody ever heard of this guy? He was French. And the French said, we know him. Him and his brother both are recruiters for the terrorists in Chechnya. They've been to Chechnya and may or may not have fought with them there. I forget exactly that detail, exactly what they said. So the FBI said to their bosses in Washington, okay, so we have the French say this guy's connected to the bin Ladenites in Chechnya. And headquarters in Washington said, we like the bin Ladenites in Chechnya. They're not terrorists. They're freedom fighters and we're on their side. And that's not a good enough tie to a foreign terrorist group. So no, you cannot search this guy's stuff. Then on September 11th, they said, now can we have our warrant? And they still said no. And you could just see, these are a bunch of meathead cops doing their jab. And then it wasn't until the director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, said, I wonder if this has anything to do with that thing in Minneapolis. Let's get a FISA warrant on that. And they went, oh, yes, sir. And they went, and immediately his papers connected him to the hijackers in Florida. And they could have rolled up the attack. And so, in other words, Bill Clinton and his people, they're too clever by half, right? They're getting away with bloody murder. Oh, what we'll do is we'll have the CIA kill Serbs and kill Russians for us by using these terrorists. Hey, it worked for Ronald Reagan in Afghanistan. Aren't we cute? Meanwhile, they've been attacking us. Oh, yeah, because we stopped at Khobar. Then they hit the Africa embassies in 98 and the USS Cole in 2000. All of these before, in the lead up to September 11th. So Bill Clinton's still backing these guys. And the CIA is still backing these guys in these foreign countries while they are killing our guys. And there's no reason to think that the CIA is behind these attacks either, right? It's just that basically they don't care what happens to us. In fact, it was in the Weekly Standard.
So you're less inclined to believe that the CIA has malicious intent and has a nefarious agenda or is part of a larger nefarious agenda?
Oh, no. It's all nefarious agendas, but I'm just saying I don't think that they controlled the September 11th attack.
Okay.
I think that this is what they call blowbacks, the long-term consequences of secret foreign policy.
Okay. I don't want to get off on a huge tangent on this.
No, it's fine. And we're basically, wrapped up on that. But the point being that, so these are real guys.
Yep.
And yes, our government controlled them. And people want to say, if they controlled them at all, they controlled them all the way. And obviously the attack served their interests. They were willing to exploit it and go on to Iraq and all of these other things in the name of it. Whatever. I can't argue with any of that. I just, I saw how they cherry picked their case about how Saddam was behind it.
Yep.
And then I saw how others were cherry picking their case for whoever. Oh, and I left out the Israelis. You brought up the Israelis. So it's worth mentioning that there absolutely were Israeli intelligence agents who were taking photographs of themselves, laughing and celebrating the attack and holding up lighters, pretending like they're the ones who are burning it down and whatever, which just goes to show, one, that just Israelis are dicks, right? These are government officials. I mean, that's their job.
Yeah, people of the Israeli state. That's what we're talking about.
That's right. And then when they got arrested, they said, hey, the Palestinians are the problem, not us. Immediately trying to blame the attack when they might have just said nothing. And the FBI was very suspicious of these guys. They were arrested and held for weeks and interrogated. There's a 4-part series by Carl Cameron on Fox News. And I wish I'd recorded it because he did a great interview with Carl Wigglesworth on San Antonio radio about it because they were good friends. And I'll never forget that, although any of the details, but I remember it happening. But people can find somewhere, I'm sure, the 4-part series by Carl Cameron, where the FBI were very suspicious about these guys, and they ended up letting them go. Now, you can say, obviously, that was just a cover-up. And these guys were apparently intelligence agents or were connected to them. Their boss, Dominic Suter, was. And this is actually how antiwar.com ended up getting investigated under a FISA warrant.
Wow.
Because Italian bank actually published this suspect list that the FBI was sending around. And we got it and downloaded it and saved it as a PDF and posted online at antiwar.com/whatever the hell. And that freaked out the FBI. And then they pretended to believe that we were agents of a foreign power so that they could get FISA warrant to surveil antiwar.com. And we won in a lawsuit against them and just made them admit it, basically.
Wow.
Anyway,
yeah, I just want to say real quick for me, like all discussions aside on like NORAD, the passports, building set, all the stuff, we'll throw all that aside.
You and me just talk about that someday.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that another time. Maybe have you back on, because I have a lot of questions. Of course. Maybe you could say.
But wait, so let me explain this part of it. So one, the motive was they're pissed off about our basis on the Holy Land, the Holy Peninsula, and our support for Israel and their violence against the Palestinians and the Lebanese.
Right.
Those are top of the list. Also support for the dictators in the region, pressure on them to keep oil prices low, to subsidize our economy at their expense, and then supposedly ignoring the Russians and the Chinese and the Uzbeks and the Indians and their violence against Muslims, which, again, that wasn't really true. We're backing them in Bosnia and Chechnya. Right. And in fact, I usually leave out just for the sake of time, but they're backing the Uyghurs against the Chinese at that time too. And Eric Margulies, who I mentioned before, he saw a Taliban base where they're training Uyghurs under Pakistani and CIA supervision in Afghanistan in the summer of 2001.
Wow.
We're back in the KLA in Kosovo right up until the summer of 2001. And it wasn't even until after September 11th that finally the president of Bosnia was forced to resign for his support after all those years, Izetbegovic, for his support of the bin Ladenites. And bin Laden himself was seen in Izetbegovic's office by, I cite 4 or 5 different mainstream journalists who saw him there. Anyway, so I'm off on the tangent about how bin Laden was complaining that we always turned a blind eye. America supported him against Russia and China. But anyway, ungrateful terrorists, SOB. So that was the motive. But then the strategy was to provoke America into blowing our own brains out. That's the deal. And that's the economic thing, the malaise, as Jimmy Carter would say. That's whose fault this all is in the first place, right? Who started the Mujahideen war in Afghanistan, or started that support, who encouraged Saddam to invade Iran, right? He called it the malaise, right? It was the economic woes of inflation of his time. And that's what we're suffering now, right? Is the consequences of this. And although America has a much more robust economy than the Soviet Union did, after 10 years of war in Afghanistan, they left. And then very soon after that, their godless, communist, atheist empire fell and ceased to exist. So the Reaganites took credit for that. Well, so did the Mujahideen. They said, see, if you just believe in God hard enough and kill commies enough, they will go home and then we'll have a total victory. Their empire will die. And then so they said, we're going to do the same thing to the Americans. See, this is why so many people became truthers, really, is because Bush said that the Taliban did it because they hate our freedom. But like, no, dude, it was Bush's fathers and his predecessors and successors, Arab terrorists, specialists, highly trained guys. Bin Laden had an engineering degree. Zawahiri was a surgeon. Like, these guys were educated guys. The New York hijackers, they were engineering students in Hamburg, Germany, right? These weren't cavemen from Kandahar. They were sophisticated guys. And so it didn't make any sense that cavemen from Kandahar are attacking us because they hate us for being good. That's so stupid, right? And people knew it was stupid, but they didn't know what the answer was. The answer was that these people, because of especially Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton's deadly sins, they are now so angry at us, they want to provoke us into invading Afghanistan so they can bog us down and bleed us to bankruptcy and force us out the long way and the hard way, the same way that we had helped them do to the Soviet Union before. And why did the Americans help them do it to the Soviet Union before? They said in the 70s, they said, we'll give them their own Vietnam. Because we had given ourselves a Vietnam, which was a giant, stupid stab in the stomach. Why would you do that? A giant no-win quagmire that breaks the bank and disrupts society back home is a massive self-inflicted wound, never mind the poor Vietnamese and Laotians and Cambodians. But boy, does America wish they'd never done that. So they go, oh, you know what? If the American people have Vietnam syndrome and they don't want to contain communism anymore, let's bait them into overexpansion. And we don't want them to go to West Berlin or West Germany, but how about the Afghans? They're expendable. We'll lure them in and give them a Vietnam, and we'll back the insurgency against them the same way the Russians helped back Ho Chi Minh against us, right? And so that's all Osama bin Laden was doing. Zbigniew Brzezinski's foreign policy only turned back around against the United States, and then America went for it. And what he was betting on was that George Bush would exploit the thing. So people, if you call George Bush stupid, people say like it's an excuse. Like he's just Forrest Gump. He really meant well, but it just didn't work out somehow or whatever. But like, no, dude, that's not what happened. Bin Laden was betting that this guy is such a corrupt, dirty dealing imperialist, essentially thug, right? Narrow-minded, short-sighted, cruel, little S-word, kind of guy. That's George W. Bush's entire persona. So Bin Laden could see him coming from 100 miles away. His son told Rolling Stone magazine in 2010, when Bush was elected, my father was so happy. This is the kind of president he needs, one who will attack and spend money and break the country. See, so W. Bush was a mark, but it wasn't like, oh, because he's such a patriotic, good-spirited citizen that he'll accidentally go too far. But it was like, no, dude, this guy is a cynic. He's going to exploit this. And then as Michael Scheuer put it, the former chief of the CIA's Bin Laden unit, said that when Bush went to Iraq, then that was the hoped for but unexpected gift to al-Qaeda. Mm-hmm. Now, not only are you going to bog us down and bleed us to bankruptcy in Afghanistan, but we're going to do the same things to ourselves on the other side of Persia, right? On the western side of Persia, Mesopotamia too. And then quickly from there, spread it into the Levant, into Syria. And so this is like Osama bin Laden's dream come true is American foreign policy. Mm-hmm. So from that sense, you could say that the whole thing was an inside job. Yeah, because the Americans were secret al-Qaeda agents. Bush and Obama and all of their men, they did nothing but serve the enemy that whole time. And they did, in essence, break the country. They absolutely broke the American people's will to field large standing armies and, large armies into other countries. Yeah. We have Vietnam syndrome again. This is exactly what they're trying to do to us. So we did it the long way and the hard, stupid way, instead of just not being an empire in the first place, which we were never supposed to be. And so, to me, I think it makes a lot more sense when you understand the motive and the strategy behind al-Qaeda's war against us. It's the same reason they attacked us in 92. Well, they just killed Kahane because they hated him. But I'm sure, I don't know if they thought much deeper about it than that. But trying to topple one World Trade Center tower over into the other in 1993, like pretend you're a terrorist. What do you think is going to happen if you do that?
I mean,
America is going to go on a rampage. Yeah. And that you're going to make things much, much worse for the people of the Middle East in the short term, in the medium term, maybe, but in the long term, America will F all the way off. Right. And so that was the plan. And even from Osama bin Laden's point of view, what did he care about a bunch of Afghans? They're like a bunch of white trash hillbillies to him. You know what I mean? He didn't really care. And after all, like, hey, they'll all go to paradise if they're good Muslims. And so he was really a commie collectivist about that himself. Like he was willing to fight to the last Afghan when he wasn't from there. He was from Yemen. His family was half Yemen, half Saudi,
Yeah. I just wonder within the construct of like the Hegelian dialectic, setting aside all the other stuff that I'd mentioned a minute ago, how much this ultimately facilitates both Israel's greater Israel in some respects, right? Like, because I see what you're saying regarding al-Qaeda wanting to bait the U.S. in.
This is good. You get me back on track here.
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily intentional because but it is good.
No, it's good. That's what I need.
But then I
go on too many tangents. I have trouble remembering on the map where I was.
I'm the same way.
Go ahead. Sorry.
But that's one piece, like how that helps facilitate greater Israel, right? Yeah. Like we've all seen those maps shared of like what Israel's idea, longing for the greater Israel. But then also how this could be used as a mechanism to, for example, the Patriot Act, right? Like to bring about tyranny. Was it just a convenient thing that then allowed for like, okay, we need more of a security state in place, right? This just happened to be exactly what some nefarious actors need.
This is all just the economics of bureaucracy, man.
Yeah. Okay.
The government wants to take every advantage. They thrive off of every failure because they have a monopoly on security.
Yeah.
And so what are you going to do? Destroy the national government and replace it with a new national government based out of Chattanooga or something? Right. No, you're not. You're stuck with W. Bush. It's the worst failure in all of American history. Now we rally around the guy who's watched this happen on because we got nowhere else to go. Right. And so of course, Biden had legislation that was essentially what the Republicans had rejected in 96 after the Oklahoma bombing, where, again, that wasn't a premeditated plot by the government to do that just to make the right look bad. It was a premeditated plot by the government to do that to make the cops look good for stopping it. And it got out of hand, and the guys blew the thing up anyways. The most obvious explanation of that is it certainly
You've covered
was
that
provoked.
quite a bit too, right?
I certainly have.
Yeah,
And I'm just by happenstance, I've been good on it since the day of, just because I knew a guy who knew lots of things that day. I was still in high school, but just as a mutual friend of my drug dealer was a Vietnam vet and was like, man, let me tell you where the bombs were right there and whatever. So, and we got an access channel in Austin, Texas. So you know how it goes, right? That's how it was him. But just as they exploited that to the nth degree, these are the, Joe Biden had helped push through the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Anti-Death Penalty Act of 1996. And these were the things that Newt Gingrich and Trent Lott wouldn't let him put in there. But this was like the rest of the DOJ and the FBI's wish list. So then when the crisis happens, then of course they introduce that and they go, see here.
So it doesn't necessarily even have to be premeditated in the first place is what you're saying. Like it was still on the slate. They're just waiting for
it's
the right
premeditated in that sense, but they didn't need the attack just so they could get their law passed. It was just, they exploited the attack so they could get their law passed, which is one shade less cynical. It just makes them just as evil, but it doesn't contribute to the theory that that's why they would have let this happen, was so that they could get it passed. You know what I mean? That's just, there's no need to go that. It's an extra step of logic where the algebra doesn't actually take you,
Yeah, I kind of like playing with this too, because this is a narrative that I haven't considered. And really, like, one, being open to truth. I can see where people who are listening or watching this, that like have the knee-jerk reaction, like, just like you're saying, limited hangout. But if you're open to truth, you're open to truth, right?
Thank you for saying that, because this was my real point I wanted to say about that. And we're going to get back to the Israel's role thing here in a second. But this is what I wanted to say about that, is that from my point of view, the whole truther thing is the limited hangout. The bombs in the buildings and the Israelis did it and all of this stuff. Oh, I didn't really wrap that up. I don't really know. The Israelis saying the degree of their prior knowledge and the full degree of their warnings to the United States, I don't know. There's reason to suspect that they did not tell the Americans everything that they knew, that they were surveilling these guys very closely. And I'm told, I really need to verify this, I've been told that there is a document that showed that one of these movers gave one of the hijackers a ride from, maybe even moved him from Florida to New Jersey, if I remember right. So that certainly is more than anything else I heard, if that particular one is verifiable. Because just that they had heard that there was something in the wind and an attack was going to happen and they thought it was hilarious, that's not enough. You know what I mean? Because of course they did. And people said, oh, it was Muslims whooping and celebrating. No, it was Israeli Jews who were whooping and celebrating from that parking lot. And so, is that an avenue worthy of continued investigation? Yeah. I just don't like all the conclusion jumping, because I like, just like with the Oklahoma bombing, what I like is, what I'm interested in is what are supposedly, what other people would probably perceive as like kooky topics. That sounds like a conspiracy theory topic. But if it was just a conspiracy theory, I'd have dropped it a long time ago. The thing is, there's a lot to what we know about Timothy McVeigh and his friends. And even what the eyeball witnesses said that morning in Oklahoma City. Every single witness, 24 of them who saw McVeigh, saw him with somebody else. Nobody saw him alone, right? Like there are things where I'm willing to sink my teeth in. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not giving up on that. I know that there's real truth there. And so, I come from that point of view. And I also feel the whole thing about, if only everyone agreed with me about this, then that would shatter the illusion and we'd all be on the same page finally, that if they can do this, then they could do that and whatever, And I'm sorry, I went off on the wrong tangent. I forgot where I was going.
Real quick, I want to make one more point.
About the limited hangout was this, that look, man. So here's the most important part I want to say about that. And then I swear I'll let you go, is the lead hijacker, Mohammed Atta, and his best buddy, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, who's in Guantanamo this day. They were engineering students studying in Hamburg, Germany. And when Shimon Peres, who became the prime minister of Israel after a Netanyahu fan murdered Rabin, he invaded southern Lebanon. And when he did, that was when Atta and bin al-Shibh signed their last will and testament, which was like their symbolic thing saying that they're joining the army. They're going to find a way to make the Americans pay for this or the Israelis if they can. And then a few months later, bin Laden put out his first declaration of war, where he cited Grapes of Wrath, and he cited what we now call the first Qana massacre, because they did it again in 2006. But they bombed, and it was, get this, it was Naftali Bennett, the future prime minister of Israel, now our past and probably future again, prime minister of Israel. He was the one who called in the artillery strike on a UN shelter full of women and children and blew them to smithereens. And bin Laden ranted about that in his first declaration of war. It was called Declaration of War against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places. Pretty subtle, right? Mm-hmm. And then he goes on and on about the Qana massacre right there at the beginning in Grapes of Wrath. And then this is what made Ramzi bin al-Shibh and Mohammed Atta decide that they wanted to join al-Qaeda. So we have Egyptian engineering students now decide that their path, instead of being engineers, they want to volunteer for a Saudi sheikh to kill Americans as revenge for what Israel's doing in Lebanon, right? And that was why they were motivated. So when people go on and on about all these things about Donald Rumsfeld shot a missile at the Pentagon while he was sitting in the damn thing, what they're missing is, or even saying the Israelis did the attack. What's being omitted is the motive of the attackers was American foreign policy and blowback against America's deadly sins over there. As Ron Paul instructed us, that if we think, we being, he was speaking for the national government, that he is a member of the House of Representatives, but I think quite unfairly taking responsibility for their actions, which he always warned against. He said, if we think that we can go around and bomb these countries and act this way without suffering the blowback of that, then we do that at our own peril and we put the American people in danger, right? So if Dick Cheney and Ariel Sharon did 9/11, well, then I guess you don't have to worry about terrorist attacks anymore because Ariel Sharon's dead and Dick Cheney's retired. So I guess it's fine. But meanwhile, we still do have terrorist attacks. And yes, it's true. And I'm as good as anybody on this in the country, and I have been this whole time. I can prove it. That about the FBI entrapment of fake terrorist cases where they get some idiot to say he loves Osama for $20,000 and then send him off to prison, whatever. And there's 300 of those. Trevor Aronson is the very best. I'm second place best on that issue.
You could also probably add to that too, the inflaming the terrorist narratives, radical Islam narratives in order to, as an ends to.
But it's also true that we've had some real ass attacks in this country too, including, and real plots that were wrapped up, like the guy Zazi from Denver who was trying to blow up the subway in New York. That wasn't a put on. They just got him because he had a big mouth, but otherwise he'd have got away with it. Mm-hmm. There was San Bernardino. There was Fort Hood. Mm-hmm. There was Arkansas, where that Little Rock, where the two soldiers got ran over by the guy in the parking lot leaving the recruiting station. There's Pensacola and Corpus Christi and Orlando, Florida. And these are real terrorist attacks against American civilians, mostly, a couple times American soldiers, but on American soil. Mm-hmm. As revenge for American foreign policy. That's it. It's blowback. And then they say, oh, I sign up with ISIS. I sign up with al-Qaeda and do it. And in fact, you know, they're burying essentially the last will and testament of this kook that did the attack on New Orleans on New Year's Day. And remember, there was this other weird soldier that did, also a veteran, who did the attack in Las Vegas with the Tesla and at Trump Hotel. And then he had this weird letter he wrote to Sean Ryan that was full of a bunch of nonsense anyway. And so that captured everybody's attention. Nobody could understand what the hell was going on with that. Everybody forgot about Bourbon Street. This guy was an army veteran who converted to Islam and then declared his loyalty to the Islamic State. And maybe he was off his meds or messed up on crank or whatever, but this is his politics, not just religion here. He's declaring loyalty to ISIS. And he drives from Houston to New Orleans, supposedly they say recording himself ranting to his family on the way there. They never released that. And then he gets to Bourbon Street and he mows down and kills 12 people. Forgive me if I got that wrong. I'm almost certain it was 12. And killed and injured a couple of dozen more. And it was just a stroke of luck only that he happened to crash at full speed straight into some construction equipment, a bulldozer or a backhoe or something that was parked right there. And so then when he got out of the truck with a gun in his hand, the cops just blew him away. But that was just luck there. He could have gone on the rest of the rampage and massacred many more people. And there's no adults less responsible for the actions of the national government than the people partying on Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve, for God's sake. And they got to be crucified for Israel's sins. We know, we don't know. I speculate, and I'm willing to bet you, it's virtually guaranteed that what that guy was ranting about was Joe Biden's support for Benjamin Netanyahu's slaughter on these poor innocents in the Gaza Strip. So just like September 11th and the people in New York City, the people on Bourbon Street, they're the ones paying the price for Israel's sins. And I think that the inside job narrative completely obscures that. That again, if we think that we can just go around the world, that our government has to stage every terrorist attack against us because otherwise we could get away with all this scot-free forever, man, you could find yourself in a terrorist attack one day if things get that far out of hand, right? And
that's plausible. That's plausible. I definitely want to look into it more. The thing that I'll say that makes me want to look into this even more is some conclusions I've come to, or some, let's say, this is inherently speculative as well, but I think people attribute too much power and scheming to the very vague term, quote, they. You know what I mean? To like what the nefarious purveyors of the various technocratic, centralized power mainstream agendas. I think it's more of a Wizard of Oz type of situation. And that's a very general statement. Yes, I
tend to agree with that.
You know what I mean? Like,
see,
that's
I'm a
what I'm getting
former
at.
kook. That maybe my bias is too far the other way, because I used to be a New World Order guy in the 1990s, where it's all about they're going to build the UN into a world government, which is somehow guys for everybody, the other countries taking over this country and all this was, so I come from that, and then it's just at some point I just grew out of that. Like,
it's understandable.
This stuff doesn't hold up. As Douglas McGregor wrote or said to me, that time wins more arguments than reason. And so, like, okay, as Dick Cheney's doing Iraq War II, this is not a new world order. Let's build up the United Nations agenda. It's just not. And so I was wrong that it was, and I was man enough to admit it then. But then that meant that a lot of things I was willing to take for granted as assumptions. And I don't regret being a kook, because I read a lot of really great revisionist history, and I learned a lot during that time anyway. Read a lot of history books that I otherwise wouldn't have, had access to and all that. So
and I'm still somewhere in the camp of, and I want to get back to the Israel thing.
Yeah. Because it ties right in here. I got a perfect segue.
I'm still in the camp of, like, I still have a lot of questions on 9/11, but again, we'll set that aside. I want to talk to you more about that at some point. Luckily, you're in this area, so I can get you back on. I know you're extremely busy, but
I should have brought my boat. We go out on Lake Georgetown and just drive around talking about 9/11 all afternoon.
Eventually.
I knew I should have. Go ahead.
But I'm still in the camp of, there is a agenda of centralizing power that has a lot of technocratic, transhumanist threads linked to it. I'm very much in that camp. And I'm also in the camp that we still attribute, we being those who are skeptical of the mainstream, who reject outright the left-right illusion and a variety of things, the whole COVID nonsense.
Sure.
We still attribute way too much power and intelligence to them. It's not that they're not intelligent, not that they don't have the capacity to commit legitimate conspiracies to conspire to do something, but I think we attribute way too much power to them. And so this really other narrative that you are now bringing to me regarding 9/11 is plausible, and it's especially attractive to me because it is stripping away some of the power that a lot of truthers apply to them, if you get what I'm saying.
Sure, although that shouldn't have anything to do with it, but I understand.
It does. It does.
I think part of it too is, especially whatever. I'm from here too, dude. Like, we're all raised to consider foreigners to just be extras in our movie at best. If they're, you don't really have much of a thought going around about, like, who are these men and what is their problem anyway, like in any serious sense.
Totally.
And if you do, well, you just love terrorists and you're repeating their propaganda anyway and that kind of thing. And so people just don't want to know that kind of thing.
Which is
and
so
honestly,
wild.
I really regret, because I did know that they fought in Bosnia and Chechnya, and in Kosovo as well. I did not have all my footnotes together then. And I did not understand the extent of it. And I wish now, really, like, if I could had a woulda, coulda, shoulda, I really wish that I had a much better hold on that story, because everybody understood, we backed these guys back in Afghanistan, but that was skip a decade back, right? In the Reagan years, Carter, Reagan. So if I'd been able to say, no, man, this is all Bill Clinton's fault, then it would have been a lot easier to get Republicans to listen then. that like, yes, H.W. Bush, it was his policy, but Bill Clinton didn't have to continue it. And plus, I hate him so much anyway. Let's just focus on him and why he didn't have to get us into this situation. And because it's true, and it made such a better argument that one, he's continuing all the policies that provoke these people to fight against us. And two, he's still backing them. And three, he's doing virtually nothing to protect us from them. And so, like, let's string him up, man. Let's put the blame where it really belongs. The chief of American foreign policy for the last almost decade, you know, who you can blame Bush for not fixing it the moment he got in there. He started bombing the no-fly zone as soon as he got in there, and damn him for that. He should have fixed everything. He had 8 months to fix it. Don't get me wrong, but the plot was in motion already. These guys were doing what they were doing because of what Bill Clinton had done. And so, and if I had understood the extent to which he was working with the Brits and the Saudis to support these guys in Kosovo, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya, especially in Chechnya, where it's like leading right up to the present day and all of that, that would have been a much bigger deal.
What if nature's intelligence could directly influence your physiology, helping to regulate your nervous system, sharpen your intuition, and shift your emotional state in a measurable way? For over 25 years, Lotus Way has been pioneering the use of flower essences, liquid infusions that capture the bioenergetic imprint of plants. Unlike essential oils, these remedies work on a vibrational level, interacting with your body's meridians and electrical system to promote clarity, resilience, and balance. Katie Hess, who I featured on episode 74 of the Way Forward podcast, has spent decades studying the effects of over 300 rare and powerful flowers, hand collecting them from across the world. The result? A line of elixirs, mists, and anointing oils, and even some chocolate, designed to shift your state of mind and body, not through placebo, but through the subtle yet profound ways plant frequencies interact with human biology. I think flower essences are severely overlooked in the wellness space because it really is an incredible way to package up the wisdom and the innate intelligence of nature and deliver it to your body. And it brings your body back into coherence because it's tuning you on an energetic level like an instrument. So if you want to find which flower essences are right for you, you can take the flower quiz so you can see which ones match your current energetic state. As a listener of The Way Forward, you get an exclusive discount. Just use code ALEC10 for 10% off your first order. Or if you're the Way Forward member, get 20% off plus ongoing savings, and just reach out to us if you're a member and we'll get you your membership discount. Just go to lotusway.com/Alec or just head to the show notes so you can experience one of nature's most powerful energetic remedies today. Hey y'all, I'm here with Melissa Kupsch from Remedy Academy of Homeopathy. We are so stoked here at The Way Forward to be partnering with Melissa and Remedy in order to spread the message of homeopathy across the world, and also to partner on the eventual development of healing centers across the United States.
People are pretty quickly coming to realize that frequency is the future of medicine. We are witnessing the great resurgence of homeopathy right now. We're really moving away from that suppressive medical model. Whether it's for eczema, asthma, hormones, fertility, anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it is, it all starts as energy in the person's field first. If we change our field, we can completely change our life. Our 2-year academy is open worldwide to anyone who wants to become a homeopath. We've got 5 lecturers and we currently have over 500 students enrolled, which is record numbers in our field. A career in homeopathy is amazing for anyone who wants flexibility in their work and who wants to be valuable in creating this new world. We have stay-at-home parents enrolled, we have ex-medical professionals, grandparents signed up who want to learn how to heal their grandchildren and pass on that invaluable knowledge. We even have husband and wife teams. So my husband enrolled in the course with no prior knowledge of health as a background, and he is loving it.
Kylie is also enrolled as well, so my partner is, and she's so stoked to become a homeopath and to be helping to spread this message across the world.
The thing that we hear from so many of our students is, I found my thing. Homeopathy is the key. We harness frequencies from nature and we alter the field of all creations. So if anybody wants to join us or they want to know more about it, they can visit our website.
Yeah, and all that information will be in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Remedy Academy, also Remedy Collective, also some of the homeopathic products that they have, please just head to the show notes. All of that will be listed there.
So, okay, let's rewind just a little bit. As I was saying, Israel's still friends with Iran in the 80s during the Iran-Iraq War. Now, Yitzhak Rabin comes in, Likud loses, and Yitzhak Rabin from Labor comes in, I think in 93, maybe in 92. But in 1993, he does Oslo and insists on the dual containment policy against Iraq and Iran. We can't make friends with either of them. And then he's working on what they call the Palestinian state, which was really a screw job and a pseudo state. But the point of it was that instead of targeting the closer Arab states and befriending the periphery states, it was called the doctrine of the periphery, being friends or prioritizing friendship with Turkey, Iran, and Ethiopia in order to divide Syria, Iraq, and Egypt's attention, right? So they'd have to divide their forces and attention in different directions. So he was turning that on its head and said, no, what we're going to do now is we're going to deal with the Arabs, which part of that is we have to deal with the Palestinians to deal with the closer Arab states. Then we're going to make friends with them as they got a treaty with Jordan in 94. But for political reasons, he had to fight somebody. He had to be a tough guy on something. So he turned on Iran. It was only after that, it wasn't until 95 that they started backing Hamas in reaction to that. I'm not justifying that, but I'm just saying that was who turned on who first. And there's this brilliant author named Trita Parsi has a book called Treacherous Alliance. You'll just love it. It's so good. And he talks about how the Clinton people laughed that, what do you mean you guys hate Iran now? You were best friends with them last week. You were on our case telling us to be friends with them last week. Now you've completely changed 180 degrees. Why? There was nothing that Iran had done. It was just that they had made their choice to switch their strategy around. And then part of this, though, was seeking that Palestinian pseudo-state on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And it was for that reason that a Netanyahu fan murdered Yitzhak Rabin, which was what led to then President Shimon Peres taking power. And then in keeping with that same strategy, though, invaded Lebanon again, attacking the Shiites and the Palestinians there as part of his strategy of essentially carrying on Rabin's strategy of going after the Shiites led by Iran. And so that was that included the massacre where Naftali Bennett killed the women and children that motivated the guys to come and attack us on September 11th. That was that same intervention there. Now, Shimon Peres didn't serve that long till Netanyahu came in the first time in 1996. And for people who are familiar with me, I'm a broken record on this, but I don't hear enough people talking about it all the time. And I really want to popularize this. It's so important that American neoconservatives, who can be best understood, as Andrew Coburn says, as a cross between the Israel lobby and the military-industrial complex. They're the vanguard of the Israel lobby in America, basically, of the Israeli-centered war party. And David Wormser and Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith as well, they wrote this thing, although Feith kind of disavows it now and says, oh, I didn't sign that, or I don't know. But it was really David Wormser and Richard Pearl clearly agreed, and this was their kind of brainchild. So, the first one is called A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. And then the follow-up is Coping with Crumbling States. And then they wrote a book called Tyranny's Ally, America's Failure to Remove Saddam Hussein. And it's by David Wormser with a foreword by Pearl. So, and people, you want to read The Clean Break or Coping with Crumbling States, they're both on my website, scotthorton.org/fair use. And you can get those. And then you got to buy the book Tyranny's Ally somewhere. But it's the same thing over and over again. And basically what it is this. They say, Israel needs to make a clean break from Oslo. Rabin is dead. Peres is out. Labor is out. Likud is back in. And we're not giving up the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We don't want to. Problem is, the more we colonize them, the more we got to worry about Hezbollah on our northern border, which is backed by Iran by way of Syria. So that's our challenge. How to steal Palestine, but also somehow neutralize the threat from Hezbollah so that we can do so without having to worry about them making northern Israel uninhabitable with their missile force and all that. But the problem is the Iranians arm them by way of Syria. Then completely idiotically, they say the best solution to this is to get rid of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Now, this is completely convoluted Rube Goldberg machine type thinking, but here's how it goes. When we get rid of Saddam Hussein, it's a supermajority Shiite country. So they'll be dominant in the country because it's a minority Sunni secular Baathist dictatorship there under Hussein. Once we get rid of him, though, what we'll do is we'll install the cousin of the king of Jordan. They're the Hashemite family, and they claim to be descended from the Prophet Muhammad. And according to David Wormser, but not reality, the Shiites are sworn to worship, essentially, and obey anyone who claims to have the blood of the prophet. So even though the Hashemites are Sunnis, and obviously imposters and propped up by the British, the Shiites will do whatever they say, which is totally not true. When the British had propped up a Hashemite king in Iraq in the 1920s, the Shiites had a fatwa against working with him in any way, which is why he only lasted 10 years and the whole thing fell apart. So it's completely inane. Yes, it's true that in the Sunni Shiite split, the Shiites went off with the family of the prophet, whereas others decide, well, we're going to pick our own imams from here on and whatever. And that was the Sunni Shia split. But that doesn't mean that anyone who claims to have the blood of the prophet then has some kind of magical divine authority over you. Like now he's your pope and your president and gets to tell you all what to do all day or whatever. It's just, that was never like that. They don't, Shiite leaders don't claim to be priests even, like with this particular divine connection of authority or whatever. They're just like your local Protestant minister, right? They're your teacher because they read the book more than you. Maybe they got a degree, but they don't have a magical, I don't mean to be like too dismissive, but they don't have an official, like a Catholic church, you're divinely ordained at some point, right? Here, you're just ordained by your peers as being good enough kind of thing, the way it is in Protestant churches. So anyway, so the Hashemites have no authority to rule over the Shiites. The whole thing is stupid. And you can see when you read A Clean Break and Coping with Crumbling States and Tyranny's Ally, they mention the name Ahmed Chalabi over and over and over again. Why? Because he is an Iraqi exile who made all these ridiculous promises to the neoconservatives to get them to invade and overthrow Saddam for him. And so he was just telling them whatever that they wanted to hear about how this would work, including that the Shiites, once we install this Hashemite king, or later, surprise, in the plan, they replace the Hashemite king with Chalabi himself, would be the new ruler. And once they make either one of these changes, they will use their new authority to lord it over the Shiite clergy in Najaf and force them to tell Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and start making nice with Israel. And that's how they'll break the chain of Iranian power. Now, part of this, I think, is because they were counting on the United States to do it, and they knew the Americans were more willing to go against Iraq than their closer enemies, their actual enemies, the Syrians and and Hezbollah at that time. And so they thought, well, they're Americans after all, and they thought, this is probably what we could get the Americans to help us to do, or hopefully in the next administration actually do themselves. And then, so again, their whole theory of power is the Shiite arc of power from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah is this threat to Israel. So we want to get rid of Saddam, so we'll control the Iraqi Shia, and they'll be able to lord it over the Shia in Hezbollah and Lebanon and make them be nice to Israel. So that's the clean break plan. So then these are the guys that Dick Cheney hired to run W. Bush's government in 2001 when they came to power. So you have the entire neoconservative crew there, which is in the vice president's office. You had Eric Edelman and John Hanna and Scooter Libby, very importantly, he was also special advisor to W. Bush. Then on the National Security Council, you had Stephen Hadley, Robert Joseph, Zalmay Khalilzad. And in the State Department, you had Wormser, who went from defense to state to then the vice president's office. He was very busy during that time, but part of it was at state. And his job with John Bolton, who's actually not a neoconservative, but is just very, very close to them. Their job was to prevent Colin Powell and his right-hand man, Dick Armitage, from causing too much trouble and preventing the Iraq War. And then at the Pentagon, you had on the Defense Policy Board, you had Richard Pearl himself was the chair of the board. Then you had Gene Kirkpatrick, who was another former Trotskyite turned Reaganite, neoconservative. Kenneth Edelman. Newt Gingrich is not a neoconservative, but was very close with them. The former Speaker of the House was also on the board and was really a hawk. You may have heard about Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby made 14 trips to CIA headquarters to beat them over the head and say, come up with more intelligence against Iraq. Well, Newt Gingrich did that too. He made at least a few trips over there to do the same thing as part of that same set, although not exactly. He never was a leftist, so he never was a neoconservative part of that group, but he was very close friends with them and helped with all that. And then you had, very famously, the Deputy Secretary of Defense was Paul Wolfowitz, and then under him was Douglas Feith, the Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, and then under him was a guy named Abram Shulsky, and under him, he ran the Office of Special Plans. And this is where they laundered all the intelligence, all the weapons of mass destruction intelligence, digging through the CIA's trash and laundering the lies from the exiles and putting all that into the intelligence stream. In other words, the CIA would lie. They'd even torture lies out of a guy, but not enough. And especially the WMD analyst types, they're dragging their feet, right? That's why they kept going out there to beat him over the head. So they're saying, fine, we'll just come up with the intel ourselves. And so as part of that group was, under Shulsky was Michael Rubin and Michael Ledeen, and I forget a few of them. Then across the hall, they had the Policy Counterterrorism Evaluation Group, and that was Wormser and a guy named Michael Malouf, and their job was to come up with Iraq and al-Qaeda ties. And then there was a guy named Harold Rode, and Harold Rhode's job was to take over the internal Pentagon think tank, which is called the Office of Net Assessment, and purge all the Arabists who knew what they were doing out of there. So this is not my conspiracy theory. This is what Colin Powell, the Secretary of State at that time, called a separate government. Cheney set this network up of these neocons ensconced in all the perfect places to lie us into this war. He called the Office of Special Plans Powell, called the Office of Special Plans Feith's Gestapo office. In other words, where they're lawless and coming up with this stuff to force us into the war. And that was the neocon network that lied us into war. Wormser was later promoted to Dick Cheney from Middle East advisor to just foreign policy advisor and worked for Cheney for years. And so this was their thinking of how it would work based on the promises that Ahmed Chalabi had made to them, including that not only would the new Shiite Iraq make Hezbollah be friends with Iran, but they would even reopen the old oil pipeline from the northern oil fields to Haifa, Israel. And a part of this, I know it's complicated, but everybody, you can rewind and watch it again. When Yitzhak Rabin turned on Iran in 1993, it actually took a little while after that, but they cut off their secret oil pipeline to Israel. You know, we call it the Sinai Peninsula, right? So picture the mouth of the Red Sea now. On this side, on the west side, is the Suez Canal and the gate to the Mediterranean, right? On the right side, the reason it's a peninsula is because there's a little gulf on the right side as well. That's the Gulf of Aqaba. I always say it wrong, but it's spelled like Aqaba. And that's where they had a secret oil pipeline that was run by Mark Rich's company, the corrupt guy that Bill Clinton pardoned on his last day in office. His company ran the secret oil pipeline where the Iranians would pull up a tanker, offload a bunch of oil, and send it up a pipeline to Israel, and was saving them on fuel. And so, in a very real sense, America fought Iraq War II. I'm not sure if that was you personally and guys you know that fought in
Thank
Iraq.
goodness, no.
But that war was so that Israel could save a nickel a gallon on a barrel of oil, you know, to rebuild the oil. You know, Tucker Carlson said this to me because, wait, so I always thought it just sounds so stupid that the war was for oil, like it was for Houston, but the war was for oil for Israel.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And I could prove, I have the footnotes that Netanyahu bought this. He talked about it. Chalabi gave a speech at Jinsa, and Netanyahu gave an interview in London, I'm pretty sure it was, where he said, oh yeah, they're talking about the pipeline. So like, he's into it, dude. And then importantly, even though Ariel Sharon was in power and they were kind of rivals, they were both in the Likud party together at that time, the neocons were always closer to Netanyahu. Mystery solved, right? Sharon, yes, was more of an Iran hawk, but he got right on board for this. And in fact, he had his men manufacture fake intelligence in English in the office of the prime minister. They had the same problem with Mossad, that they wouldn't come up with enough lies. So they made their own little office of special plans in the prime minister's office to manufacture fake intelligence in English to funnel into the intelligence stream.
Wild.
And you can read that in the article, The Spies Who Pushed for War by Julian Borger in The Guardian. And it's not Agents of Influence. It's by Robert Dreyfuss in The Nation magazine.
What do you think of it? Just tell me and we'll throw it in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll find it for you.
Okay,
It's definitely Robert Dreyfus in The Nation. And then also James Bamford in his great book, A Pretext for War, 9/11 Iraq and the Abuse of America's Intelligence Agencies. And so, so that was the deal. So this was a huge part of their thinking of why America needed to do this. Another major Israel first part of Iraq War II was, as Philip Zelikow said, and I know people don't like him because he's the principal author or the overseer of the 9/11 Commission report, which I never read, by the way, so you can't blame any of my thinking on that. But it was Zelikow, I mean, for a 9/11 cover-upper, it was Zelikow who said that, let me tell you something, okay? And people don't like to talk about this, but you will hear the neoconservatives, because he was not a neoconservative. You will hear them talk about this, that their real problem with Saddam Hussein was he gave money to the family of Palestinian suicide bombers. So anyone who died in conflict with Israel, he would pay money to their family. But that included suicide bombers, right? Not just some old lady who got her house bulldozed and she was still in it, which they would do, but somebody who attacked little kids in a pizza parlor, his family would also get a payment, right? So in a very real sense, I ain't denying it's true, right? In a very real sense, he's paying bounties for Hamas suicide bombers to kill Israeli civilians, okay? But that's not a good enough reason for George W. Bush to drag us to war. That would never do. But Zelikow says this was Paul Wolfowitz's motive. This is what the neoconservatives cared about, but they knew that that wasn't a very good sell to the American people. That if Israel has to deal with Hamas, that sounds terrible, but that sounds like an Israel problem. We are not going to war in Iraq for that. But but that's just why they had to lie to you. That's why they lied to your dad. Tell your dad, don't listen to me because I love terrorism for some reason. And don't listen to anybody who says they know better than this. They're commie, America hating, homosexual or some kind of thing trying to undermine this country.
Of course.
When all it is they can tell you the difference between the guy in the mustache and the guy in the beard. See how this guy wears olive green and a beret like a Frenchman, and how this guy has a giant beard and is dressed like Obi-Wan Kenobi? Like, that's meaningful, okay? You're supposed to understand the discrepancy there. The guy in the beret is terrified of the guy in the robe, in fact. Because of course he is. He'd have to be insane not to be, right? And so, right, because Saddam's rule in Baghdad was no more legitimate to Osama bin Laden than ours would be, you know, of course. And by the way, it was Paul Wolfowitz, I'm almost certain, it was unnamed, but it had to be Wolfowitz. He said, you know, it's true that the reason al-Qaeda is attacking us is because of our bases in Saudi Arabia that we're using to bomb Iraq. That is untenable. That's what caused September 11th to happen. But that's why we have to invade Iraq, so we can move those bases to Iraq instead.
God.
So they'd admit that much of it and then just make it that much worse, you know? So then, now...
We get to Hamas too, because
we're getting to Hamas.
Okay,
so,
cool.
But now, so real quick now, Iraq War II does lead, of course, to an empowered Shiite supermajority taking over the country. But they're not the cat's paws of the Americans or the Jordanians or the Israelis. They're the cat's paws of the Iranians. Now, there's a lot of resentment against the Iranians as well in the country. It's not like they're total sock puppets, but they're certainly Iranian clients. It's the Dawa Party and Supreme Islamic Council are the big winners of the war. And they needed Iran way more than they needed us. And after winning the war for them, which America did win, the civil war for the Shiite side, kicked all the Sunnis out of Baghdad and, you know, cleansed them all the predominantly Sunni Shiite areas and helped them consolidate a new Iraqi Shiite stand, basically, from Baghdad down to Kuwait and over to Iran. And they just decide that they need Iran more than they need us. George Bush bet that maybe they'll need our money and weapons more, but no, they need their next door neighbors and co-religionists more, and that's how it's going to be. So that's why America has had such limited influence in Iraq since then. And it's part of why America resented themselves for backing the Iraqi Shiites so much that then they went and backed al-Qaeda in Syria. And this was a very Saudi and Israeli-centric policy, that you guys just put Tehran up 2 pegs in Baghdad. Now you have to take them down a peg in Damascus. So if you were wondering why Obama backed al-Qaeda in Syria, it's not because he is a Muslim terrorist. It's because he's W. Bush. And he was trying to make up for the mistake that his predecessor had made. We just empowered Iran, our regional rivals. So now we're going to back our enemies, the bin Ladenite suicide bombers who actually are bathing in the blood of thousands of innocent American civilians, because that's who's useful to take on the Shiites.
Right.
The Army and the Marines, they don't want to go to Syria. but we can send bin Ladenite suicide bombers to Syria. And so that was what they did. And that was the reason why, is because they hated Assad, because again, he was the arch, as Wormser put it, he was the arch, or the keystone in the arc of Iranian power in the region there. And so if getting rid of Saddam Hussein just destroyed the roadblock and actually completed the chain, then we have to get rid of Assad in Damascus. That was Obama's policy back 15 through 10 years ago. And that's the policy that Joe Biden took up very severely at the end of November with his Israeli and Turkish allies, and helped al-Qaeda sack Damascus and overthrow Damascus finally and take it over in December of 2024. And all of that is to spite Iran, because we're mad that they accepted our gift of Baghdad when we gave it to them, because our guys thought that it was going to weaken them and benefit Israel, and it didn't. They never got their pipeline or any of that.
Wow.
So this is how they're trying to make up for it. And again, now why all this? Why the clean break? So that we can keep stealing Palestine and not have to worry about Hezbollah, right? So you think about the last year and a half of war, Hezbollah, at least for the first year of it, was a major problem in firing all their missiles, essentially intervening on behalf of the Palestinians, which is exactly what Wormser was writing about, that he was so afraid of, that we can't finish the job as long as we on a 3-front war. We can fight 1 or 2, but not 3 kind of thing. And so that was what the clean break was all about, so they could steal Palestine better.
Wow.
And so now, and then what happened was Hezbollah jumped into the war, but Israel, with the president like Donald Trump, who's just got no reluctance, and I meant Donald Biden, he's got no reluctance whatsoever to let Israel go far beyond what W. Bush or Obama would have ever allowed, that you can just go right ahead then and attempt to completely finish destroying the Palestinian civilization on the Gaza Strip. And then so Hezbollah did intervene, but then Israel, with American support, really kicked their ass, man. They just have, they did have a lot of Iranian supplied missiles and that kind of thing, but compared to the United States supplied Israeli forces, they just bombed the crap out of them. Then they did their, evil but brilliant, you have to admit, pager attack, where they severely crippled the vast bulk of fighting capable males on the Hezbollah side, and they killed their leader, Nasrallah, their extremely powerful and charismatic leader that they had. So Hezbollah has just been taken down to, I don't know, 1/10 of what they were. They're just bust as hell. And then again, with American and Turkish help, they overthrew Assad in Damascus. So any support that Iran could ever supply to Hezbollah is now going to be that much more difficult for them to do. And so the Israelis are able to get away with murder. Now, you should ask me about October 7th, because we're skipping
that's what I want to ask
about. Because I'm talking about Hezbollah's role in this war and how that plays into the clean break. That here we are after 25 years of letting Bush's neocons decide our policy. Like, this is what it's all wrought.
Real quick, though, before you get there, I do want to ask about the establishment of Hamas.
Yeah, good.
Because there are a lot of narratives surrounding that. And it for so many people, it has become unclear. Like, there seems to be some indication that Hamas was funded initially by Israel in order to oppose the PLF.
Yes. So it wasn't created by them. It wasn't created by them.
But it was
funded by them, and they would persecute all their enemies and lock them all in jail and seize all their weapons, but allow Hamas to flourish. And they had a relationship, and people absolutely should read, especially Richard Sale in UPI. That's SALE. Richard Sale, a great conservative reporter from way back. All his sources are CIA, Mossad, Shin Bet, saying, yes, we did it. It's not the Palestinians. It's all the American and Israeli side saying it's true. And the reason they did it, as you say, was to provide a religious and right-wing counterweight, especially to Yasser Arafat and Fatah, who are sort of like nationalist and commie leftist sort of thing. And so by boosting up what began as, it was the Muslim Brotherhood started it was a charity. And then they just built it up into a force. And then, I don't know if they like directly abetted their turn to terrorism or all that. I think not. I think they probably Hamas did that themselves in the first
What's
Intifada.
Interesting, though, because it would provide the perfect excuse, though, if they did. If they did. Because, again, I don't know. But
they
it would provide
didn't need an
perfect
excuse at the
justification.
time. I mean, I think they preferred not having an Intifada, right? They preferred like what was going on at the time colonizing, getting away with it. And I think we're pretty much taken by surprise by the first Intifada that the Palestinians would put up that much resistance after. At that point, it had already been almost 20 years of occupation. And I remember Noam Chomsky talking about how people were really surprised at, like, why would the Palestinians rise up? Because they just had no idea. They'd been lying to themselves and all of us during the population during that time so thoroughly that, you know, like, if we refuse to call it an occupation, then it must not feel like one to the Palestinians. You know what I mean? Like, it is not an occupation. And like, okay, but to them it is, and they're going to suicide bomb you eventually. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing happens. So, but it's certainly like whatever, because you're still right that, like, yeah, if them being right-wing religious zealots makes them more likely to engage in terrorist acts, well then great, because you can scapegoat the entire Palestinian society on that.
Which is what's done continually,
and that's
all the time right now.
Which is exactly what, you know, I don't know that was really like the entire plan in the first place to go that far. Like, oh yeah, if we sacrifice a few kids at a pizza parlor, it'll work out great. Like, I don't think that was really their thinking, but it didn't need to be. What was important was that they were dividing and conquering the Palestinians and making it where these guys can't work together in a new state because they treat each other and are going to treat each other as implacable enemies rather than just rival political parties or something. And they have no real state to be rival political parties in. So it's a fight over who's going to control what little power there is now, kind of thing.
Right.
And then, but they said at the time that was why. It was to divide and conquer the Palestinians and to discredit them, because if they can say, especially see in the old days, they could say, this guy's a commie, which is code for completely insane, implacable enemy, right? But once the Soviet Union is gone, well, I don't know. Leftists at least kind of live in our same time period where some of these real religious fundamentalist Muslims think that piety means living in the 13th century again. Forget that. You know what I mean? Like, that's more irrational, whatever. So I think they realize that change, that, you know, communism doesn't work. This is in Trita Parsi's book. A prominent Israeli strategist told Trita Parsi, we needed new glue for the alliance with the Americans. So we settled on fundamentalist Islam. Right? Because that means any Muslim we want to murder, we just say that he's a fundamentalist Muslim. But then what does that mean? It means that if he believes in his religion, which is, by the way, not your same religion that you believe in, if he believes in it that hard, then he's irrational. Right. And you can't negotiate with a guy like that. Right. It's the same thing they said about David Koresh. Same thing they said about Saddam Hussein, even though he only worshipped himself. But it's that same attitude. This guy's crazy. So, you know, that means that there's no point in talking with a guy like that, because no telling what he'll do. And no point in believing his promises, because don't you know, they have a special mandate from God that they believe that they're supposed to lie to infidels like us, right? Like, all those things are all built into it, right? And so this is a self-perpetuating thing, which really, oh, look, what a coincidence. All our enemies are the superpowers' enemies. Isn't that great how that worked out, you know? Right. And that was the way they got to frame that. So,
should we zoom up to October 7th now? Is there more Hamas stuff?
Okay, well, so Hamas is part of this. So we're back to, that's the 7th. So last time Trump is president, he brings his son-in-law with him. Jared Kushner, who Benjamin Netanyahu used to sleep in his bed when he would come visit New York City. Okay. He was just purely Israel first, don't give a damn about the Palestinians. Now, as I talked about in the case of Rabin, where he's trying to negotiate with the Palestinians so that he can negotiate with the Arab states, the Sunni Arab states. Well, Netanyahu says, I want to negotiate with the Sunni Arab states and not give the Palestinians anything. That's the challenge of the Netanyahu doctrine. How can I get away with everything I want and not have to give up a thing at all? And so that was the purpose of the Abraham Accords, was Jared Kushner realized that, well, we can just print the money, so what's your price? And so he bought off the king of Bahrain with F-16s and the king of UAE, or the kings of UAE, the emirs, with F-35s. Debt forgiveness for Sudan, and he recognized Morocco's invasion and aggressive illegal seizure of the northern half of the nation of Western Sahara. And in exchange for that, they would all sign what were called the Abraham Accords with Israel, which you might think on face value, great, more peace treaties, the better, whatever. But of course, they weren't fighting, so these aren't really peace treaties. What are they? They're officially normalizing relations. But why? What? Why not before? because especially the Saudis, but the rest of them too, had always promised that they would never fully normalize relations with Israel until the Palestinians got their independent state or citizenship in a single state. And so, as the Ayatollah had said about Arafat, if Arafat's willing to deal and settle for the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, well, I can't be more Catholic than the Pope. Let him do it. I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
But they got to get something.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just forsake them entirely. And especially because if the Israelis have total control of the West Bank, then that means total control over the last of the Muslim holy sites, and most particularly and importantly, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Israeli zealots would like to destroy and build the third temple in its place. And so the Iranians don't want to be a part of that, or pardon me, the Saudis even don't want to be a part of that. So their whole deal all along was you make a settlement with the I should have said, if I didn't, even the Ayatollah, because that was all their stance. The Saudis had put out their peace plan in 2002 that was for a two-state solution, the rest of that. So the Saudis have been perfectly negotiable. I brought up the Ayatollah because it was like, even the Ayatollah says I can't be more Catholic than the Pope, right? Well, the Saudi kings, of course, as well, are perfectly willing to negotiate on all this and to recognize Israel fully if they would give the Palestinians a fair shake. So the Abraham Accords was a way to circumvent that by bribing them enough that they'd go ahead and forsake the Palestinians. So this is why Hamas did what they did on October 7th. Wait, I'm skipping one step. Netanyahu gave a speech at the United Nations General Assembly on September the 22nd, 2023. And as often he does, he had a visual aid. In this case, it was a map of what he called the New Middle East. And it has all of Israel one color with the occupied territories as one color. There's no West Bank or Gaza on there. It's all greater Israel. And then on top of that, it has this big red line that's all of our new friendly Arab states in the Gulf. And he says, this is the new Middle East. And that was an inside joke. He's mocking Shimon Peres, who said, we have to pursue the two-state solution so that we can have this new Middle East. And Netanyahu saying, I did it. I got the new Middle East and I didn't give the Palestinians nothing. And he says in the speech, screw you Palestinians. Nobody's coming for you. You know, and the way he phrased it, of course, is the Palestinians have been holding peace hostage, but now they no longer can because we outflanked them on this. So then it was 2 weeks later that Hamas broke out of their pen and did the October 7th attack, in which...
Do you think they really caught them by surprise?
Well, look, what we know about that is that, and there's so much reporting in the Israeli press and
it
the
just
New York
seems
Times.
so absurd looking at, you know what I
Their
mean?
own spokesman in the New York Times, I mean, Ronan Bergman, who you choose whether he's representing the Israeli military or Shin Bet or Netanyahu's office. Like, I don't know, but he's clearly relaying their version of the thing, which is, yes, we knew everything and could have stopped it. There's no question about that. That they had the full plan a year in advance. They have those people completely pwned in terms
That's
of
what I'm
surveillance.
saying, man. Like, because when
people on the border said, hey, there's activity. But there's a major counterpoint to this argument, dude.
Okay.
Which is that the boss said he knows what he's doing. And he's precluded the possibility that this is not going to work. And so we're not going to hear anything more from you or you or you up the chain of command about how it ain't working and something bad is happening. Now, there are multiple quotes of Netanyahu, and I kind of skipped this part, but I should go back to this and then we'll get back to the attack in a minute.
Okay.
That because it's not just the foundation of Hamas. It's in our current day. And I have an article about this. People want all the citations and footnotes. It's all in an article that I wrote with Connor Freeman. It's called Netanyahu's support for Hamas backfired. Netanyahu's support for Hamas backfired. And I have all of these quotes, especially Netanyahu himself, saying, listen, if you want to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state, you have to support Hamas control of the Gaza Strip. This is how we keep them divided and conquered. This is how we tell the Americans we have no partner for peace. You don't expect us to negotiate with these terrorists, do you? And that part I'm paraphrasing. But then he ends with, but don't worry, we control the height of the flame. Now, there were 3 sources for that. And then they tried to deny it when 3 different, and he said it to the Likud. It was his own people who quoted him saying it. But then we got him now on tape, dude. If you watch the documentary, the Bibi Files, which is all about his corruption, it's just footage of interrogations of him by the police. And they ask him, the Shin Bet interrogating Netanyahu, ask him, hey man, what's up with all your support for Hamas? And he says, listen, we know we can never deal with them, which of course is the point. And he says, but we control the height of the flame.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, just like Bill Clinton, in all of his arrogance, he thinks he's getting away with it. And this is one thing we got diverted off. I was going to say earlier about this was a cliche in the Pentagon in the 1990s. The Pentagon Joint Staff were the most important policy planners for the Joint Chiefs and the leaders of the services. They had a cliche, which was terrorism is a small price to pay for being a superpower. Right? So they're thinking like, yeah, what are they going to do? They're going to set off a truck bomb at an embassy overseas somewhere. They're going to try but fail to sink a battleship. Like, whatever. We get to rule the world. And you're telling me like some kook with an AK yelling is going to dissuade us from this? Forget it. Right? And I think not imagining that, no, they're going to kamikaze your towers with jumbo jets is what they're going to do, dude. Mm-hmm. It's going to be way worse than something like that. And it was that kind of failure of imagination, I think, that led to September 11th. And hell, this could even led some credence to the inside job part, just in the part of, even if Dick Cheney was allowing it, doesn't mean that he necessarily knew how bad it was going to be. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that would be a part of it, that maybe Dick Cheney thought it was just going to be somebody's going to set off a truck bomb at the State Department or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Whatever. That's speculative. But anyway, so I think this was the attitude was, yes, Shin Bet knew and the military knew and everybody was warning. But were those warnings getting all the way to Netanyahu that, hey, boss, you're an idiot, dude. Hamas is about to break out of their pen and kill all our guys. See, your whole policy has come to nothing. Now, again, just like with the truthers, well, you can see how he immediately moved to exploit the crisis. So why not let it happen in the first place?
Well, this is
which is a fair question. I'm not saying that's an unfair question. It's also goes to show like what an absolutely horrible and idiotic thing it was for Hamas to do what they did.
Totally.
Because we don't have a bog Israel down and bleed them to bankruptcy policy here. All they've done is just absolutely unleash the whirlwind, right? The complete destruction of their society there by killing civilians and putting Netanyahu in that position. So in other words, why would Netanyahu let it happen? So that then he can get away with even worse. The same reason that he had his government embellish all the tales of what had happened there far beyond the truth.
One thing that I look at when analyzing which narrative of that it is possible, and there's a variety, right?
Sure.
Is Netanyahu's treatment of Israeli people through the COVID era, which was one of the some of the most tyrannical policies, and was overtly stating essentially that he was willing to use the Israeli population as guinea pigs for the vaccines.
He's like Spock, man. It's
That's
the greater
my point.
good that is all that counts, is that commie thinking, which Israel was founded by communists from Eastern Europe.
Right.
Like, they don't really share Western values. They never did.
Right.
So
you see what I'm
sure
saying
he
there,
thought
though,
he was
right?
doing COVID's a great example. He thought he was doing the right thing for, quote unquote, his term, the Jewish people, by being their self-appointed leader, and that the COVID, all those lockdowns, all the forced vaccines, all the rest, that was what was good for them as decided by him. And if there's a cost to that, tough. I know what I'm doing. Same kind of thing here, where, listen, we have to keep Hamas enthroned there so that we can keep telling the Americans we can't deal with these guys. If we lose that talking point, we're screwed. We got all the liberals in Europe are just over it. And even the liberals in Tel Aviv would love to jump down my throat and make me give up a Palestinian state. If you want to help me thwart that, we got to keep doing this.
Right.
And so it totally makes sense from his point of view. And then look, we control the height of the flame. If the kitchen ends up catching on fire, trust me, it won't. But if it does, like, tough, man. You're telling me 1,200 Israelis had to die so we can do what we need to do to finish cleansing the Palestinians and take Gaza? Like, would he allow that? I don't know.
That's where it's maybe. Like, I don't know, but it's not too far-fetched is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Sure, but you know what? Honestly, the simplest explanation is always, not always, but usually, almost always the most reasonable and the accurate one. That, look, man, sir, we have indications that they're really preparing for something. okay, but the last time I said that to my boss, he chewed me out because he didn't want to hear it because his boss didn't want to hear it. They don't want to know that their brilliant strategy of using Hamas in this way is not working. And
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
That's fair.
They're just not. And that's how, it's government, man. It's a government program. And so it's full of all weird, bad disincentives,
Yep.
In every way. I mean, who would think that it made sense to this guy at all to prop up Hamas just to delegitimize Fatah?
Right.
But that's how a government thinks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in other words, like for them to even let Hamas attack would be just one step on that same ladder he's already climbing.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. So then there's a few different narratives, let's say, from pro-Israel voices regarding their, I don't even like to call it a war because it's not a war.
Wait, go back one, because I just thought of it going, I want to steal me on this argument. It's important.
Please go ahead.
Is Ariel Sharon's disengagement from Gaza in 2005. He said, we already gave him a Palestinian state. Oh boy, I don't remember that. You mean without negotiations, you just gave it to him, huh? Well, no, of course not. They kept him under blockade and they kept bombing him and killing him and all of that, and ended up provoking a crisis where they get to put them under total blockade. You're referring after they forced the election in Gaza, where Hamas won a plurality. They didn't win a majority in a single district anywhere in Palestine. But when they formed a coalition government, then David Wormser actually threw Elliot Abrams under the bus for this. Elliot Abrams came up with a scheme that will work with the Egyptians and the Israelis to do a coup d'etat and help Fatah overthrow Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And that'll get rid of them. And it backfired and led to Fatah getting run out of there, and Hamas then ultimately consolidating their control over the Gaza Strip. And after that, they just kept bombing them and leaving them under siege. It was the Israelis who broke the ceasefire time after time after time after time. And Ariel Sharon's, and by the way, this is really a crisis, much worse, is not as bad as it is now, but at the very beginning of it, it was a real hunger blockade. People were starving. And they admitted, they said, well, we're keeping them hungry but not starving, which literally is a direct quote that Walter Duranty said about the Soviet communist Holodomor in Ukraine in the New York Times. It's not a famine. They're just hungry, not starving. Exact quote that the Israelis used about the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
How ironic.
In the Obama years, or pardon me, in early Bush, or late Bush, early Obama.
Wow.
And they said, we're keeping them on a diet by counting their calories. And of course, this means denying them baby formula, denying them wheat, denying them basic foodstuffs for survival. So true, horrible collective economic war against these people. And it has been. Now, Ariel Sharon's advisor, well, I got to go back one. The first one's a guy named Arnon Sofer. And you can read this again at scotthorton.org/fair use. It's called We Have to Kill and Kill and Kill. And this guy gave an interview. He was an advisor to Sharon. He was a demographer from the University of Tel Aviv. And he went to Ariel Sharon and he said, Ariel Sharon, the Palestinians are having too many babies. Too many babies. We're already at like 50-50. Things get too much more out of hand. They're going to be the majority and we're going to be the minority ruling the majority. And at that point, that could really become a problem for our allies and everything else. We have to figure out a solution to this crisis. Here's Arnon Sofer's brilliant plan. We'll, quote, disengage from the Gaza Strip. Pull a minimum amount of settlers from Gaza. There weren't that many Jewish settlers in Gaza anyway. That'll be a controversy, but we can get it done. And then we'll put them under this siege. Premeditated completely. And in doing so, we will figuratively kick them out of Israel. Right now, they're occupied territory. We're going to call this disengagement. We're going to call this the end of the occupation. Maybe they're not controlled by Egypt. They're just controlled by Hamas now, but they're not controlled by us. The occupation is over. We've disengaged. So now we're back to 6 million versus 3 million on the West Bank. Or 5 point whatever versus 5 point whatever in both territories, right? So they're kicking 2 million figuratively only, in name only, in sophistry only. By disengaging, they're kicking the Palestinians out from under their control just so they can count fewer Palestinians as being under their control, even as, of course, they still are. And then in the interview, it's an interview with the Jerusalem Post, the conservative paper over there. And the lady asks him, well, yeah, but like, what about the Palestinians? They're going to accept this? No, and he says, oh no, they'll fight. But then we will have to just kill and kill and kill to keep them from getting too much out of hand. We'll have to keep this in the state of permanent siege and continue to just wipe them out. This was the guy whose advice Sharon took and began the disengagement from the Gaza Strip. That was the purpose of it. Was sophistry, right, to pretend that somehow these people aren't their responsibility anymore. When, of course, it's still an Indian reservation. Now it's just far worse than before, under worse siege than before, right? And then another Ariel Sharon advisor, Dov Weissglass, said the whole purpose of this is to not give the Palestinians their own state. God, if anybody listening to this ever heard and repeated that, and thump yourself in the ear one time, man, come on. It's not to give them a state. It was to put the peace process, that is the negotiations towards an actual independent state, in formaldehyde, right? Which is a preservative for corpses.
Right.
We're killing the peace process. We're putting it in formaldehyde. We have from the U.S. Congress a no one to talk to certificate. And we're not giving that up. And now, if anyone in America, in London or Paris or Tel Aviv says that we have to negotiate, well, the Congress says we don't. We have a no one to talk to certificate, and we won't have to negotiate with these people. Hamas is the dominant force there in Gaza until Gaza becomes Norway. In other words, a perfectly peaceful, homogeneous, democratic state that causes no security threats to its neighbors. See you then, and shalom, he says. Right? So that's the entire cynical story of what they're really doing with that siege against the Palestinians, and how it is only properly understood as a situation where Israel has foisted Hamas on the people of Palestine. It was Bush and Sharon that made them, or Olmert, I guess, by then, who made them hold the election, who screwed with the results until Gaza took over, and then used as an excuse to marginalize these 2 million people ever since then. And for all the people who say that somehow, well, the people of Gaza elected them, well, in 2005, the majority of the population of the Gaza Strip were minors. So they weren't the minors. They were actually the majority. Under 18, had no role in that whatsoever. Then you had whatever minority actually voted. Then you had the fact that Hamas only won a plurality and not a majority in any single district anywhere. And then you have the fact that that was 20 years ago, and the majority of Palestinians are under 18 now too. And you're telling me that through their popular sovereignty, they're responsible for the crimes of Hamas? You'd have to have George Bush's CIA waterboard and burn and pull the fingernails out of and bury alive and torture an argument to get away with that.
Insane.
It's insane. And it ought to be completely and terribly insulting to any victim of it.
Right.
Like, how dare these people treat us with such contempt that, as Murray Rothbard used to say, are we to be spared nothing?
Most healthcare today operates on an outdated, mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rush diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols, addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result? Another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Cowan co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Cowan has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream, It's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, F-O-R-W-A-R-D, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember. Now, when we talk about Israel's response,
yeah,
there are so many narratives surrounding this, and of course, you hear the consistent excuse that, well, this is war, or this is justified because the people of Palestine, of Gaza, they support Hamas, or they're not trying to actively overthrow Hamas. So ultimately, they got what's coming to them. Of course, you already covered the voting thing. But when we were talking about Israel's response, there is so much justification being thrown around from people who are ostensibly on the side of freedom and in many cases saw through the COVID charade, but are falling for this bait, hook, line, and sinker when it comes to supporting Israel's so-called justified response.
Yeah. That's the same thing that they said about Iraq. If the Iraqi people won't rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein, then Bill Clinton is justified in starving them to death. But of course, they had their chance to rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein. America encouraged them to take it and then betrayed them and let Saddam crush them while America stood right there and watched in the spring of 1991. The Great Bay of Pigs in the desert, the Shiite and Kurdish uprising then. No sane, informed person anywhere on earth believed that the Iraqi people could rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein after that. But oh well, you just have to go hungry then.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, that's barbarianism, and it's illegal because it was America that made everybody sign the UN Charter, and it was America that passed the Geneva Conventions, and it's American federal law that says that it's a felony to violate the Geneva Conventions and commit these war crimes. And Israel's a signatory to the UN Charter and all the Geneva Conventions as well. They are bound by that law. This is, when American conservatives talk like that, they sound like a communist commissar working for Joseph Stalin. Well, you people are responsible for what somebody did, and so you'll all be punished for it. And it's completely crazy.
Right.
And there's no justification for anyone who lives west of Germany to think that. Right? This is barbarian Oriental thinking fit for Outer Mongolia or Bhutan or communist China, but not the West, where we believe in individuals and dignity and freedom.
Especially if the same people are then willingly recognizing, again, referring back to COVID, that the actions of the people do not reflect the actions of the government, and there's no possible link between the two.
It was so funny, Dave Smith debated Dean Cain that played Superman back in the old days, and Dean Cain's like, "Oh, well, Hamas did this, so that's the price those people pay." And Dave goes, "Oh yeah, well, America did Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, and Syria. So I guess any of these terrorists have the right to come and kill you. Is that what you think? That American lives are forfeit because of all the sins of our government?" And Dean Cain didn't say another thing for the next 20 minutes in that thing. It was luckily for him, it was a panel discussion on Piers Morgan. He couldn't think of another thing to say the rest of the time up there, because if Palestinians' lives are forfeit and it's good for Israel to kill innocent civilians, then what is your syllogistic, rational, reasonable argument for why Americans have a right to not be killed in our office towers?
Mm-hmm.
When after we claim, as Osama bin Laden said, we claim to be a democracy. We pay our taxes. We don't have to, he said about us. That's who these people that you're talking about are parroting. They're parroting Osama bin Laden's stated explicit logic for why it's okay to kill American civilians. Because somehow we voted for Bill Clinton, even though I sure as hell didn't. You know? I couldn't possibly be responsible for that man's sins. How could I be? And I did everything to stop him that I possibly could from the time I was in high school, by the way. Right? Same thing for all of Bush and Obama's and all of their men's sins. Now a terrorist has a right to kill me? Only if you accept Madeleine Albright and current modern day American conservatives' logic.
Right.
And Osama bin Laden's logic.
Yeah, it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
It is insane. And so now, tell me more about how it's okay to bury a Palestinian baby alive, where a Palestinian toddler who's going to die in over 5 days, dehydrating and starving to death, trapped in a void space in his collapsed apartment building, a fate worse than death. You know, all these people, and I'm glad, I'm for this. I don't want to sound too like whatever about it, but there are people who are upset now that churches are being bombed and Christians are being killed. Well, the Israelis have been killing Christians in Palestine this whole time. They've been bombing churches this whole time. They called the Palestinian Christians goyim, which is just like the N-word or gook or something like that. It means I can kill you if I want. Mm-hmm. That's what it means. That's how it's always been. But then also, wait, like, okay, like all these American conservative Christians, I know they'd agree with me that like it's just as wrong to kill a Muslim infant as a Christian infant. And like a Muslim toddler, shoot a Muslim toddler in the head. That's any less sinful than shooting a Christian toddler in the head? Now tell me, at what age is it now okay to murder an innocent Muslim civilian, but not a Christian one? When does that kick in? And what page of the New Testament says that? Give me a break, dude. You know what this is? It's partisan politics. You know who supports the Palestinians? Icky commie college kids. So I'm a good American conservative, like Ben Shapiro and Marco Rubio. I believe what they believe instead. I saw a clip the other day of a guy. I'm so addicted to these YouTube shorts. I just scroll and scroll and scroll. And then I watch a lot of veteran podcasts and stuff. These guys, there's 1,000 of them now. And this guy's going, oh my God, I saw a clip of Joy Reid. And I go, oh no, because I hate Joy Reid so much. And I'm like, oh, good. I didn't say, oh no yet. I said, oh, good. I wonder what it was, some stupid thing that she said that this guy's going to destroy now. Right? Good. I'm listening. Mm-hmm. And he goes, yeah, she said, well, why can't Iran have a nuclear program? And I go, oh God, Joy Reid, would you please shut up? You are not helping me by identifying my argument with your idiocy. Like, here is a lady who was bad on every single wokest thing in the whole world, and now she wants to sound anything like me in explaining the reality of Iran's nuclear program. Here is help I don't need, okay? And so then the guy says, oh, sure, like they just need 60% uranium, and oh, sure, they just need to bury their facility under a mountain, and oh, sure, I forgot what the third one was, but like, they're perfectly reasonable explanations for all of this, right? Mm-hmm. But all he knows is these are the talking points he's heard from the Hawks, and that Joy, forgive my French, goddamned Reid says otherwise. Right. So I know whose side I'm on. Bomb Tehran, right? And it's just a simple matter of social psychology here. Like, maybe if he would listen a little closer to Tucker Carlson, he would realize that it actually doesn't matter what Joy Reid says at all. Right. They had the 60% enriched uranium so that they could negotiate it away. They're trying to get us back in the deal. If you're tuning in the middle of the episode here, we had a deal, then we broke it, and they're trying to get a new deal. They needed some leverage. Why not? This is the same thing Mike Baker said on Joe Rogan the other day. Oh, 60%. Okay, finish that in a complete sentence, pal. You need 90% to make weapons fuel out of it. So why didn't they just go to 90 then, if that's what they're doing? Tell me why they stopped at 60, stupid. And he can't because he's a liar. He goes, well, Joe, blah, 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 and then another thing, and changes the subject. And can't explain. I can. They needed the 60% for leverage. They did the exact same thing in the Obama years. Give me a break. If they were making bomb fuel, they would have just made bomb fuel.
Well, this is
and
what
the 60%, by the way, was available for weight and inspection by the IAEA at the time, too. This is no secret breakout program. And why they put it on their mountain? Because Israel had always threatened to bomb it. Of course, that's why it's there. Doesn't mean that they were making nuclear weapons. I'm sorry, I forget the guy's third point. But his real point was, I ain't like them MSNBC liberals. I don't like them, and I ain't like them. Screw them. You know? And so therefore, I'm a pro-Israel Iran hawk, apparently. See how easy that was? Just show me Joy Reid. And I actually learned this in social psychology class in junior college at ACC in 1997. That's called attitude inoculation. I give you an argument, and then I give you a weak one against it, and now you're double in your previous agreement with the argument when you just barely agree with me. I barely gave you enough to agree with. But now you're really sure I'm right because you hate that lady. Totally. And it works every time, dude.
Perfect false dilemma.
It's in the textbook.
Yeah.
How you do it.
It's a perfect false dilemma. And ironically, regarding the nuclear weapons in Iran, just like there are multiple quotes going back years from Netanyahu talking about the need to support Hamas, there's a variety of quotes from Netanyahu and a variety of other Israeli officials talking about the need to stop Iran. They're this close. They're weeks away. They're months away from developing nuclear weapons, going back 20, 25, 30 years. Those quotes are ubiquitous. You can find them everywhere. Right. The other thing that I want to ask you, though, regarding Hamas is that there's two more things. One is the supposed understanding that they are hiding their weapons stores underneath civilian areas within Palestine. And then the second one is that they are seizing the aid that is being brought in to the Palestinian people.
Well, I'm sure there's some truth to the first one. But then what they do is they go, that's human shields, which like sort of kind of is. But you see here, now we're going from a dictionary definition to a figure of speech. We're like, okay, if you're firing from a civilian area, that's directly equivalent to holding a civilian in front of you as you shoot, which it's kind of is, but also kind of isn't. For example, the Israelis have all their military facilities in downtown Tel Aviv. Their Pentagon is right in downtown Tel Aviv, their headquarters there. So that means then the Hamas are war criminals if they fire an unguided rocket at it and they're firing in a civilian area. But then, okay, fine. But then the Israelis are simply using the civilian population of Tel Aviv as human shields. As long as there's one rule, that's the rule if that's how you want to apply it. But then let's talk about Israel actually using human shields, as in tying a little boy to the front of their Jeep as they drive through where they think there's going to be enemy fire, or what's called the mosquito protocol. Everyone Google this with quotes. The mosquito protocol, where Haaretz did this explosive, deep investigation. Have all these quotes come from, of course, Israeli military sources themselves, where as a senior Israeli military officer put it, he said, we have a sub-army of Palestinian slaves that we use, and then that's the end quote, and then that they use to send into buildings, through rubble, through tunnels, wherever they think there might be booby traps. You might remember the start of the war, they were using dogs. Well, the Palestinians are just nothing but dogs or less to them. They will force grandmothers and grandfathers and junior high school age kids to go and clear the rubble for booby traps for them. And not Hamas captives who they caught red-handed being a terrorist fighter of one kind or another, but just regular people. That's using human shields, literally, in the absolutely illegalist sense of the term. And now, you might remember Amnesty International got in trouble politically because they told the truth that the Ukrainian army was firing from next to civilian facilities in the war with Russia inside Ukraine. And people screamed at them because you're not supposed to say that, even though it's true. But Amnesty didn't say that's using human shields, because that's already its own thing. Firing from civilian neighborhoods and endangering them, whatever they call it, but it's already its own thing. A human shield is like it's actually the guy that plays Boba Fett is also the officer who holds Princess Leia in front of him when Luke is shooting. That's a human shield, right? Tying a little boy to the to the head of your Jeep. And you just put in Israeli human shields in your Google images and just look for yourself. You see it for yourself. They do it all the time. And again, this is in Haaretz, the mosquito protocol. They said every unit has one. Every unit has a Palestinian slave that they use to clear rubble, to clear booby traps. And why is it all rubble? Of course, because the Israelis bombed it all. It's really sick. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second one?
The second, well, just a quick point on that.
Yeah.
That whole argument is built upon the foundation that is the presupposition that Hamas is so well equipped and well armed to cause sufficient damage to Israel, which is built on the narrative that this is a legitimate war between the Israeli government and its supporters.
That's such an
and
important
Hamas,
point.
which is completely false in and of itself.
Exactly.
Like, that argument is upstream from those 2 points that I just mentioned, which are entirely untrue themselves.
Right. Exactly. And I remember your second point about the aid.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, this goes right back to October 7th. I mean, why do we call it October the 7th? Because it was over by supper time, right? So what happened was they broke out of their prison. This is like the Aryan Nation, where the strongest gang in the prison broke out of the prison walls, killed some people in town, and now you just bomb the prison and kill 50,000 people, right? And this is actually what Nelson Rockefeller did at Attica, right? So send in the National Guard to blow everybody away, including the prison guards. That's what it is, like a military operation against an Indian reservation. So we don't call it the horrible Hamas attack of October 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 10th, or the autumn of 2023.
Right.
It was one day. Right? And it's been almost 2 years of retribution against people who didn't do it ever since then.
Right.
High tens of thousands of people killed. Because it's not just those directly killed, but it's the excess death rate caused by them deliberately destroying every single hospital, every, marketplace, everything that is a part of sustaining civilian life in the country that they're doing. And now there's actually an article on antiwar.com today. We're recording this on Monday. There's an article right now about how there is no proof of this. And it was even Cindy McCain, which if John McCain was here, he'd be pissed, I guess. But she's the head of the World Food Program. And she said there is no evidence at all that Hamas is stealing all the food. And again, we have a story about this today. This is just the latest Israeli Hezbollah, that no, we gave all the food, but Hamas stole it all. That's not true. Well, before the siege, when they were letting UNRWA, the UN agency, distribute it, people weren't starving to death. They were going hungry, and it was very bad, but it wasn't this bad. And it ebbed and flowed depending on how much aid they were letting in. It was far from perfect. It was really horrible. Now what they've got is only this Israeli front is allowed to distribute aid. And where the UN was distributing it at 44 sites across the strip, they're distributing it in 4. And again, you can't make this stuff up, dude. They slaughter people queuing up for food to eat. They starve them. They bring them in.
The IDF
Norman
does. That's what you're
Finkelstein, the
talking
IDF. Norman Finkelstein said it's like a mousetrap.
Yeah.
They bait starving people to come in, and then they massacre them. Again, if I was telling you, man, did you hear about what happened in Bhutan, where the military dictatorship treated the tribes people this way? You'd be like, oh, man, those sure are some Eastern Oriental barbarian types. You might even disbelieve me.
Right.
That like
because
really?
It almost sounds unbelievable that someone could be that barbaric.
It's insane. And I know the cognitive dissonance in America too is, if they're really doing that, then why are we backing them then? Well, touche.
That's a great question.
But that's the thing, is people think it can't be true, or we wouldn't. But that's like, calling all people with a conscience.
Yep.
We have to stop it. It's up to us to figure out what to do to raise the pressure that this is not tolerable. It's absolutely criminal. And this is worse than W. Bush's war in Iraq. I mean, per capita, he caused a civil war where the Sunnis and Shiite militias, really chewed each other up like crazy over there. And it's a huge American responsibility for that. But this is at least equivalent to the moral crime of Iraq War II, maybe worse. And it's just, and the rules of engagement with which the Israelis fight is far worse. In fact, I have a military expert friend, you might know of him. His name is Matt Williams. He's the Australian war analyst, Matt Willie.
He's in Iraq twice,
Willie,
right?
OAM, Afghanistan.
Afghanistan twice, okay.
Yeah, Australia wasn't in Iraq.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
But I interviewed him, and he explained how the Americans in Afghanistan, it was the same rule for the Australians. In Afghanistan, the rule was, and I think he said in Iraq as well, the rule was you can kill 10 innocent civilians to kill a target.
Which is even insane in and of
Which
itself.
is
like
even
absolutely
insane
disgusting.
in and of itself.
Like,
and this is all day, every day, too.
Yep.
And he says, you can kill 30 civilians to kill a high-value target, as designated by intelligence as high-value target. The Israelis' rule is that they can kill 300 civilians to kill one high-value target. Okay? That is war crimes.
Yep.
That is genocide. It's an excuse for genocide. And people go, oh, when genocide. I heard some leftist commie homo say the word genocide, so now it can't be legit or whatever. Sorry. The term doesn't mean, oh, they already killed 6 million people and now we're talking about it in hindsight. The term means an attempt to destroy another people's civilization, their society, destroy their country, destroy their peopleness. If you can, stretch your brain to be that collectivist about it, their peoplehood as a independent, voluntary association of people as an ethnicity or a nation, and a huge part of that. So, in other words, you can massacre maybe even more than this, right? Like W. Bush killed more than this in Iraq, but that wasn't an attempt to erase their civilization. It sure did destroy Christian civilization there, and the Yazidis and whatever's very hard on the smallest minorities. Maybe they were genocided by the Sunnis and Shiites in the thing. You could put that on America as well, but
as a byproduct, yeah, absolutely.
But in this case, it is literally and quite deliberately an attempt to raze all their cities completely to the ground, to destroy, to bomb all their hospitals, but also all their schools, their universities, and all of their government buildings with all the registries, the family registries, property ownership, all those things. They're obliterating all of that. And with the stated intention, so often repeated stated intention of destroying their civilization, to drive them all out of there.
That's what's so wild to me is it's overtly stated.
That's right.
It's overtly stated over and over again.
Yeah.
And despite that, people say, no, that's not what they're doing. They're literally just trying to get Hamas.
Yeah. No, but that's just a lie. Yeah. It's just giving you something to hang on if you need to for your dissonance, right? If you, for your insane, emotions, man. If you don't want to admit that, like, we're on the bad guy's side in this. That's it. This is the Warsaw Ghetto. Right. And that's why, by the way, I mean, come on, man, this is something that anyone ought to be able to think of this themselves. It only occurs to me every once in a while, but it's such an obvious point, and anyone ought to figure this out too. How could it possibly be that so many Jews are against this? It's because it's wrong.
100%.
There's no reason in the world for them to side against Israel and for the Palestinian Arabs, who, again, most people assume that they're all Muslims, but none of them are Jews. Mm-hmm. And, the Christians are a small minority there. And we know why. It's clear why. It's because they have American, Western, liberal values, where it's not okay to murder people, even if they're from the other tribe and you covet their land and want to steal it. It's, in fact, you might say, against their own religion's rules, but it's against American law and our entire concept of how you treat a civilian and his property. You just can't do that. These are, Martin Luther King civil rights folk in America. Mm-hmm. American Jews are liberals almost entirely. Mm-hmm. And they just look at this and they go, this is horrible. Right. And like some of them can rationalize it away, but so many of them can't. I mean, you have massive protest movements that are led by Jews, Jewish Voice for Peace and these others. And sometimes they'll take a back seat when they're working with the Muslim groups because, like, whatever, you guys are the Palestinians, you want to lead the thing, but we're right here to support you in the thing. And why? People from, I saw an interview the other day with, there's this, oh my God, this documentary, The Settlers. Have you seen that? The new one, The Settlers? And the guy's from New York City. He's raised in Brooklyn. He's not escaping the Holocaust. He's from Brooklyn. And he's stealing property on the West Bank. And this whole thing is just criminal. It's all it is. And you got other people, other Jews in Brooklyn who say, screw that guy, man. How dare he do that? Now, why do they think that? Oh, because they hate themselves so much and they hate their ancestors and they hate their history and they hate their religion? Or no, what he's doing is wrong and they have morals. Give me a break.
Right.
This whole thing is so stupid.
The other thing that comes up a lot too, I see this, it's rampant on Twitter. The amount of people who are saying, well, you can't trust the numbers coming out of Palestine, or they'll say that anything that you see coming out of Palestine is purely propaganda.
Yeah. Okay. Now on the first thing, I can understand at least why people would find that more believable as a talking point to repeat or whatever. But if you look into it at all, you will see that in fact, they are severely undercounting the dead there, because all they have, the only people that report are the people whose names they have. So they have bodies who are unidentified, who they don't add to the list. And they have thousands of missing, who we all know are buried under the rubble, or buried alive, or killed in the attacks. So many people buried alive, little children buried alive. It's unreal. But then they come in with the bulldozers and just clear it all. There's footage they didn't know they were being filmed where they just wax these guys and then bulldoze a hole in the beach and just dump them in there.
My God.
Where, so they're doing that all the time. So there are thousands of people who are missing, which means they're dead. Or either that, they've been kidnapped and taken off to torture prison, but almost certainly they're dead. So it's an undercount. And in the State Department, nobody else actually, or maybe the current State Department, the last one didn't dispute the numbers. They just don't care. They continue to ship the weapons anyway. But there's just no reason in the world to think that Hamas is exaggerating in this case. Now, if you want to say like, oh, but Izetbegovic did in Bosnia? Yeah, I know. I wrote a book about it. That doesn't mean that that's what's going on here. And anyone who has the fortitude can just go type in the word Gaza on the search on Twitter and go see for yourself. Go look at them kill little babies, kill little toddlers, kill women and children deliberately. Again, one of the headlines on antiwar.com today is an American mercenary working for the Food Distribution Service who's absolutely whistleblowing and turning rat on all of them and saying, I've never seen, he's a special forces veteran, been fighting in the terror wars the whole 21st century long, Green Beret. And he's saying, I've never seen anything like this at all. Absolutely, it's war crimes. He's interviewed by the BBC. Absolutely, it's war crimes. They're lining up people for food and then machine gunning them and artillerying them, hitting them with artillery shells and tank rounds, blasting them as starving people are begging for food. And there's no threat present whatsoever. And they're just killing them. And then they show evidence of this. They show the American mercenaries on the ground there shooting at the crowds of starving people and then laughing, ha, I think I got one. And all of this on the record. And I mean, this guy ain't liberal and he ain't lying, man. We are not supposed to be doing this. And if September 11th was the consequence for the Grapes of Wrath in southern Lebanon and the Qana massacre, that was 106 women and children. This is 60,000.
Right. It's interesting. There's a few things I want to cover, but just a brief point. I've thought about this, like the left hand, right hand, sort of left-leaning paradigm, right-leaning paradigm in the policies that they enact. How I would argue that both sides, and I don't think there really is sides, that's a separate conversation. I want to try to speed this up. But both sides ultimately are comprised of neocons who are like war hawks, essentially, at this point.
Pretty much.
But the point still stands that in general, the right tends to be much more authoritarian and drop the authoritarian hammer when it comes to foreign policy abroad. And it's pretty wild because...
Except for Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
Yeah, fair.
And
totally,
Joe Biden.
Totally fair. Totally fair.
But other than them, though...
It's a fair point. That's why I added the context.
I let Jimmy Carter off the hook there, right?
Yes,
I didn't skip Truman, did I? Sorry, I didn't mean to skip Truman. The butcher of Asia.
Yes, but that's why I added the context at the beginning.
Yeah.
But the general sentiments are that. So just play at this point.
Yeah, gotcha.
Bombing almost indiscriminately, either by the U.S. or its allies, its greatest ally, in the Middle East, creating an absolute humanitarian crisis with hundreds of thousands of people dead, millions when it came to, Iraq and Afghanistan, hundreds of thousands of people, if not more than that, displaced, who are now pissed off. And then, again, I'm a anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, libertarian, like to the nth degree. But I also recognize what we're dealing with in actuality right now with the current state of things. And I've thought about, then the other policy is to just fling the border wide open. Yep. And those same people who are angry and pissed off now entering the country.
I couldn't agree with you more, dude.
And that's
it's
the thing.
It's a real danger, man.
Yeah, but I don't want to be fear-mongering in that too, though. Because
you should. Because it's a serious threat, man. It really is. And it goes again to that 9/11 truther stuff. We're like, no, man, this is the threat. That people want to kill us because what we help Israel do and the people we help Israel kill. this is a major problem, and I'm paranoid as hell about it. And I know that there is a whole right-wing kind of narrative about, oh, Hezbollah has taken over Latin America. And they always sleeper
I don't
cells.
tend to think
Like,
it's that, like, that
yeah,
as
no, it's
drastic
the Bin
as-
Ladenites. It ain't the Shiites. It's the Bin Ladenites, man. And they are dangerous, dude. They absolutely are dangerous. And they are not just the cat's paws of the CIA. They're not. And, you know, I am terrified about, I don't think that I am in danger, that you are in danger, anyone listening to this is in any particular danger, but our country is in danger of getting hit by these guys again. We're just lousy with soft targets. And again, look at Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve last year or this year. And I think that this is exactly what we can expect. I mean, if she told me, oh my God, texts are coming in right now, somebody just kamikazed a nuclear power plant or shot up a ball game or some kind of thing and yelled Allah Akbar and revenge for Gaza, I would believe it. And I'm terrified that that's going to happen, man. I really am. And I think that, like, damn it, that's what everybody should be saying. That's the narrative here, dude. Okay. Supporting Israel is against America's national interests.
Yeah.
This is what caused all three of those towers to collapse. America helping Israel kill babies.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're doing now. That's the danger our government is putting us right back smack dab in the center of. And it was absolutely what we have to oppose. It was because our country is in danger from this. And imagine what Donald Trump would do if somebody caused a mass casualty attack, you know, fully armed and trained and practiced and body armor wearing Arabs with fully automatic weapons at any major gathering, a county fair or a party or a ball game or anything, dude. Is a kindergarten. This country is lousy with soft targets. We have to stop motivating attacks against our country. And that is all that we get out of our support for Israel. They talk about how we're the greatest allies. We're their greatest allies. What do they ever do for us except sell our weapons technology to the Chinese and get our civilians killed in terrorist attacks, get our soldiers killed fighting in Fallujah?
Right.
Right? They're nothing but a burden on us. And I think, look, you should not, if you see somebody as like some kind of right-wing scaremonger talking about how like, oh, boo-hoo, I have this theory that Iran is going to send Hezbollah to kill us all or whatever kind of thing, like, that doesn't sound right to you because it's probably not right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, don't go parroting that. But like, is it really smart to think that we're safe when we still have Bill Clinton's foreign policy and George W. Bush's foreign policy that has helped to engender all these terrorist attacks against us so far? Barack Obama's policy. I mean, that's what we're still doing over there. And so, I'm really worried about, and I'm virtually certain. We'll see if I'm proven right or wrong about this, but I'm virtually certain this is the reason for the clampdown on the story of New Orleans, because they don't want us to know that all those people in New Orleans, just like the Orlando attack. Remember the Orlando attack? They've said that this guy was gay and that because he was a Muslim, he hated himself because he was gay, because Islam makes gay people hate themselves. And so then he went and shot up this gay nightclub and killed all these people. That was 100% lies. Well, not the gay nightclub part, but he wasn't gay and he had no sexual like orientation, psychodramas going on. The only reason he picked that club was because it was the first thing that came up on Google. He wanted to attack Disney World, but he decided they had too good a security to get through to where the people are. So he decided to Google nightclub and it was the first thing that came up. The only reason we know this is because they tried to prosecute his wife and she was acquitted. But in the meantime, they had to admit all this evidence that went and showed this. And then they lied and lied for, I think, more than a year about this before they finally released the transcript of his 911 call and the text of his Facebook post, both of which said, stop bombing Iraq, stop bombing Syria. This is after Obama built the caliphate. Now he's blowing it up again. Stop bombing Iraq. Stop bombing Syria. You're killing women and children. I've had enough, and I'm going to make you pay and taste the blood of your victims and blah, blah, blah. 100% blowback. 100% blowback from American foreign policy. So, of course, they lied and told you this guy hated gay people and hated himself for being one, too. Yeah, right. And it's what they always do. They have to lie. And I debated Mark Dubowitz on the Lex Friedman show. And I said, you know, this guy, he doesn't care that Mohammed Atta and Ramzi bin al-Shibh were motivated to do 9/11 because of America's support for Israel's war crimes against women and children in Lebanon. And Dubowitz went, blah, 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 filibuster about something else. Because, yeah, that's exactly right. He does not care about that. He doesn't care if every last civilian in New York dies as long as Israel gets what they want. Because that's who Mark Dubowitz is. He's an agent of a foreign power. He's here if, though the heavens fall, though America fall, let Israel's will be done. That's his point of view. He'll stop at nothing.
That seems to be a lot of people.
That's right. And I hear people say, hey, good on them, man. They should look after their own interests. Okay, well, fine. But then we should look after ours.
Yeah.
Why in the world are we doing their bidding when they clearly are, if there's an enemy state of ours, the country in the world is the greatest threat to America's national interest is our ally Israel. Not Russia or China or India or Brazil or any other power in the world.
This is just another piece that leads me to believe there's some level of premeditation and intentional desire to allow these types of things, if not in some level orchestrate them. Here, this is the piece. The expedited agenda of centralization of power, technocracy, et cetera, et cetera. And if an attack were to happen on American soil or against, American bases abroad, that would then, of course, expedite what goes above and beyond the Patriot Act in terms of biometrics and things like this. And it could really just be, in either case, that this is just a convenient thing that is falling in our lap at this time because
look at Hurricane Katrina. They didn't cause that, but they sure exploited. They had the army going around seizing guns from people.
Yeah,
doing whatever they could get away with. They passed a new law that said in a severe storm, the army gets to take the lead from now on. What? Mm-hmm. All right, but of course they're going to do that.
Yeah,
whether they generate the crisis or not. So look, you're right to just note on the basic economics of government. It's in their interest to let bad things happen to you.
Yeah.
That's why they let criminals out. Isn't it puzzling when you read like some guy possessed some drugs and so they gave him 15 years, but then some guy committed an armed robbery and he got 5, that kind of thing.
Right.
I had a friend who did a lot of hard time on a drug charge, which he was a drug dealer. It was just pot.
Right.
But he sat there and watched real ass rapists and murderers and armed robbers go free over and over and over again. Well, of course, it's in government's interest to make us afraid of the 0.5% of us that go around committing random crimes against people. You know what I mean? Theft crimes and whatever. I mean, some guy gets drunk and murders his wife on Saturday night. That's its own thing. But as far as like just crime out there in the world, for profit motive and that kind of thing, they're like, yeah. Keep the dangerous people out there. So just like in V for Vendetta, I want these people to remember why they need us, right? And so that never goes away. And so then, yes, does that make for a ready-made motive for any old bad thing, for them to allow any old bad thing to happen to us? Sure, it does. Doesn't mean to jump to that conclusion every time, but it
totally
gives you plenty of reason to be suspicious.
Yep.
And you should be.
So this is a 2-part question. Like I want to wrap this up, and thank you so much for sitting with me for this. The first part to this is there's a natural reaction that I'm very hesitant to buy into, like very, very hesitant, because I just don't believe it's true whatsoever, to sort of overgeneralize and blame all Jewish people for everything. But then on the flip side of that, there's this tendency and positioning of any criticism of Israel, of the U.S.'s support for Israel as anti-Semitic. And I think people are just growing increasingly frustrated with that. So maybe I'm answering my own question. It's like the pendulum is swinging up to the whole other direction now, where everyone, because of not being able to simply just say, yeah, I don't agree with the U.S. supporting Israel and its pursuits.
I think that's
being
conflated.
Too. Yeah.
So what happens is people become actually anti-Semitic. You call somebody an anti-Semite 10 times for no good reason, and your name is Goldbergstein while you do it, and then they end up saying, fine, I guess I am one then. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which is great, because that's what the Israelis want, is they want to pretend that anyone who's opposed to Israel is an anti-Semite.
That's my
See,
point.
I tricked him into using the J word, so now he's a bad guy and this kind of thing, right? So, so people who let themselves get that angry that they, fall that irrational in their argument, they end up doing the Israelis dirty work for them. And of course, the Israelis like anti-Semitism out in the world because it helps encourage Jews to go ahead and make Aliyah and move to Israel. So, for example, there was a terrible terrorist attack in France, which was, pretty sure it was AQAP, did the grocery store attack on the kosher grocery store in France and killed some Jews there. And Netanyahu came to France and said, "That's right, French Jews. You're not French. You're Jews. You'll never be French. And the French don't want you anyway. So come home to Israel." And they were so pissed because they were like, "No, dude, we are French and Israel's not our home. And how dare you come?" And the self-appointed so-called leader of the Jewish people, of the state of Israel, actually, to come to France and declare to the people of France that the Jewish French are a fifth column that truly represent Israel and not France. That is not true, and how dare you say that about us and all that. But then, good, if he makes trouble for them, good, because then they'll move to Israel, and that's what he wants. And that's what he's interested in. So it's, probably a silver lining to their point of view, right? It's not like, oh, generating anti-Semitism is job one, but killing and stealing and taking what they want and telling whatever lies in the world, that's all job 1, 2, and 3. And then if it helps generate anti-Semitism, good, because that undermines legitimate arguments against what Israel's doing, and it helps terrify Jews into moving to Israel. And so it serves Israel's purpose to make people react that way. And you want to talk about false flag attacks. I'm really concerned about the level of avowed Jew hatred on Twitter, and I'm very suspicious about it. And I think some of it is natural. It's just what you're talking about, is that frustration, not being allowed to talk about this at all, and then people get mad and they go too far.
Right.
But then, man, it just totally makes sense. They'd be fools not to be running bot farms full of people saying, "Yeah, I agree with you, Scott Horton. Damn them Jews." Right? Which is never what I said, right? Only Martin Dubowitz would try to lie and put those words in my mouth. But then I got some jerk coming agreeing with me. I don't know if you ever saw this movie, The Brotherhood of the Bell. It's about the Skull and Bones, really. It's got John Ford in it. And but instead of Skull and Bones at Yale, they call it The Brotherhood of the Bell, and it's out at Stanford. But anyway, and so he's trying to expose it. I'll spare you, but it's a great movie. He's trying to expose it, and he goes on it's like Howie Mandel type, whatever, it's ridiculous, like daytime talk show. And he describes this conspiracy that controls all these elite levers of power and all of this stuff. And this black hippie with a big afro gets up and goes, "Yeah, man, it's the white supremacist power." And he's like, "No, dude, no, that's not what it is." And then this little bitty lady all dressed in pink with her little pill hat, she goes, "Yeah, it's the Jews. And he's like, no. And he's trying to explain that it's not, and he's got all these people agreeing with him, boosting his signal. And he's like, "I don't need this help. That's not what I said. That's not who I'm talking about. That's not what this is." You know what I mean? But it's the perfect way to sabotage him.
Totally.
And
makes sense.
I actually was the host of a conference for just a short time one time where a little bitty old lady she wasn't wearing a pink pillbox hat, but little bitty old lady gets up in the crowd and starts saying, "The Jews, the Jews, the Jews." And I didn't know what to do. And thank God one of the panelists interrupted and said something funny and saved my ass. But the obvious response is, well, we found our FBI informant. Right. Like we see who's the wrecker here, because all the panels, everyone here is a professional. Everyone here is a journalist or a writer or activist with a serious reputation who cares a lot about what's going on here. Nobody, left, right, libertarian, or anyone else is here to complain about the Jews. Right. Give me a break, right? And so maybe this one lady was, or maybe she was sent there. There are some out there who legitimately, but it's like, but like, she's, whether willfully or not, she's sabotaged, right? And it's, and it makes me suspicious about what's behind that. Yep. You know what I mean? That so many people, and I get it too, that people really don't like being told what they cannot say. Right. And so people really react against that. It pisses me off too. Yeah. And so, but I would just encourage everyone to remember, like, we're all born one at a time here, dude. And we're not responsible for each other's actions. We're responsible for our own actions. Maybe our younger brother or our old lady or our kids, but otherwise, when you drive drunk, that's not on me, dude. I'm
Yep.
sorry, right? It's the same thing here. When our government, when Bill Clinton and W. Bush and the rest of them aid and abet these policies, they're responsible for that. That doesn't mean you and me are any more than it means that I'm sure there are Jews who live in your same apartment building here, and they don't have anything to do with this one way or the other. Probably the majority of American Jews, or at least I remember there was a thing where it's like a big poll that had a third of American Jews don't care about Israel at all. They don't think about Israel at all. They're just Americans living their life, man. They don't know about that or care about that.
Right.
When it came to Iraq War II, where I described how these neoconservatives, many of whom were Jewish and obviously representing the Israel lobby, lied us into that war. Well, overall in the country, if you divide by ethnic and religious grouping, American Jews were the most opposed to Iraq War II compared to any other group of Americans.
Wow.
Now, you could say, well, that's because they're liberal Democrats. Fine. But that means they're not Likudniks, and they weren't there. They weren't here to tow water for Ariel Sharon and help lie us into that war.
Mm-hmm.
They were liberals in the street, thought this was a George Bush war for Exxon or something, and they were against it for that. Right. Nobody gave them a memo that said this is good for the Jews, and that's why they were supposed to get on board. Or if they were told that in their AIPAC briefing book, they didn't believe it. They disagreed with that. Everybody knew, like, come on. Saddam did 9/11. We just started bombing him that week. Not waited a year and a half until we could bluff our way in there. Come on, you guys. You know what I mean? So,
right.
For people paying close attention. So, whatever. Anti-Semitism or anti-whateverism is always stupid, man. That's not the goal. It's the state is our enemy because they're organized, legitimate violence. And so, at the very least, we need to curtail that as much as we possibly can.
That was going to be my next question.
A necessary evil. Let's stop at absolutely necessary and tolerate no more evil than that.
Amen. And it goes back to what you said about the individual too, because like I can't force, and it goes against voluntarist libertarian principles to attempt to force someone to adopt my ideology. It comes back to I'm in control of my own actions, thoughts, feelings, words, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to do what I can on a daily basis to be a good human being in the face of this and not perpetuate this same hatred from the flip side that I'm witnessing happening in Gaza. And I also think there's some element of we need to be cautious in how much of that from at a distance we are consuming, because I know some people who are in this space that you may well know as well, who I've seen, I won't say turn dark, but I see the life being drained out of them because they're just constantly consuming video footage of what is occurring in Gaza. And I think
it's so sick. I can barely stand to read about it. And I've been doing this for 30 years.
That's what I'm saying. And that's what
I'm like this. I've already made my peace with like, well, whatever. They're the ones suffering. I just got to read about it. But at this point, I can barely even read about it anymore. Yeah. It's just so disgusting. Deliberately starving people to death. There's the same thing in Yemen under Obama and Trump the last time around. It's just deliberately inflicting a famine on people. This is, as I said then, as Daryl Cooper's been saying about this, this is going in the history books. The American people might not even know about Obama and Trump's war in Yemen, but it happened, and hundreds of thousands of people died and starved to death. And it was really Saudi and UAE, but only with American support all along, the whole way through. And that's going in the books, and that is on, not to contradict myself and be too goddamn commie about it all, but like that is on our civilization. That's on us. You know, those of us who tried to stop it couldn't figure it out, didn't do enough, and not enough of the rest of us cared. Yeah. And ultimately, as Ron Paul said, you get the kind of government you demand. Even in the Soviet Union, when people weren't willing to go along anymore, the whole thing just fell apart.
And that's my point. So, yeah, exactly.
Like, it is, you know, I hate to just put this on other people because freedom is what I'm fighting for. I would prefer to live a world where me and you both can just do our job and mind our own business and live our own life and don't even necessarily have to care what goes on outside our home county. I've known people like that my whole life, and especially living in Texas, there are people who, they don't even ever hear what's going on a national level at all. There's a war on terrorism. What's that? They don't know nothing about their own small life, and I'm for that. That's what I want. That's what I want for myself. That's what I want for everybody. Just be free and not have to pay attention. Problem is, our government is the world empire. Our government is up to our eyeballs in this stuff, and we are implicated in it all. And so I personally take it as my responsibility to try to do everything I can to stop them. I don't want to put that on everyone else. Like, we all must. But those of us who feel like we should, we must.
Well, you have a platform,
Right?
and that's the thing is like, at the least, this message, whether it's this podcast, you on Tucker, whoever else, that can be shared with someone who has been sold a false narrative and is actively supporting Israel.
Hope so.
Or
That's the point.
whether from a religious context or from a political context or both.
Yeah.
We didn't even touch on the religious piece of it, but that's a whole nother thing that you can totally dismantle the idea that this corrupt government that is calling itself Israel is referring to the same Israel, which was a people from the Bible.
And I got to tell you, man, I lived through all this. The people believed that the Branch Davidians killed themselves until they didn't anymore. And the people believed Saddam had weapons and we had to do that until they didn't anymore. And so people say, oh yeah, Hamas is a terrorist group. Okay, sure. But that means really we got to kill tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians Palestine's not the country next door. This is an Indian reservation, a conquered, occupied people under siege in a prison, an open air prison here. It ain't right, man. We have to come to a consensus. This is not what we are supposed to be doing. This is not the shining city on the hill. This is somebody else's agenda, and it's a barbarian one. It's at our expense, and we got to call it off. And I just know it's already happening. People are just waking up to it. They're just opening their eyes to it. I mean, Candace Owens she's a great one because she's a leader. So makes such a great example in that sense. But look at what happened to her. She saw a picture of a dead baby and said, oh my God, I just gave birth to a baby. Well, this is bothering me. And Ben Shapiro went, blood libel. You hate Jews, anti-Semite. And she went, whoa, 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 dude. All I said was like, there's got to be a better way. Blood libel, nothing. It was the Israelis that killed this kid, man. And so she went, okay, well, fine. I'm just joining up with the anti-war movement then.
Right.
You're going to kick me out of conservatism or kick me out of the war party? Well, I'll just help lead the other side.
Amen.
And thank God for that. But she's only one of very many.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear from people all the time. They're like, why? I'll tell you this, because this is, something somebody said to me. I gave a speech in Philadelphia, or was it Pittsburgh? I forget. In 21, when they were bombing the Palestinians then. Horror show then. Few thousand killed. And then I did it was a Libertarian Party event. Mises Caucus event. And then I went to the New York State Libertarian Party convention, I don't know, a couple of months later, I think. And a guy said to me, he goes, I was in the audience at that speech. He goes, I have to tell you, I was raised in my church. The only thing I know about Israel is what I learned in church. That good Christians have to support them. And then I heard your speech and I realized that that's really just foolish. That can't be part of my religion, is that I have to support, it's not even your religion that you have to support the United States of America. It's your religion that you have to support Israel. And then when they're clearly engaging in premeditated acts of evil, that can't be right. And he said that was it. All I needed was a fair shot to hear the other side of the story one time, and now I'm good. He never looked into it before. He didn't know about it before. As he said, what he knew about it, he had learned in church. When he got to hear about the real world, he went, oh, I get it.
Right.
So, this is I like to invoke the great Ron Paul, of course, that when he was running against Bush in 2008, he's a Methodist, German stock, white guy, Texas Republican politician, right? He came out of the exact same cloning chamber as W. Bush himself. Although Ron Paul is not a blue blood the way that the Bushes are, but to the average voter, they're indistinguishable from each other. And Ron said, you don't have to believe in this stuff. Come on, man. They're lying to you. You know that. And people went, oh, great. Thank God. I had been under this impression that I wasn't allowed to be anti-war without somehow identifying with Michael Moore, the big fat communist millionaire hypocrite from Hollywood, who I despise. And so, but now you're telling me that I could be like you. In other words, I don't have to change my identity. I can just change my mind about this one thing. Same thing here. I'm not telling you all of the rest of your faith is wrong. I'm just telling you that we all got to do what Israel says. That part's stupid, dude. That's not even, you don't even have to tear that page out of the Bible, because that's not even what that meant. So, healed. You know,
Right.
free yourself, demons out, and now you are free.
Right. Man, Scott, thank you so much for joining me. This was enlightening. Very
Absolutely.
enlightening
Well,
conversation.
Good. Thank
So-
you for having me. I really appreciate it a lot.